"You don't have to love me." She said it like a woman who had already accepted the verdict. Quiet, hollow, the words of someone who had learned that wanting too much only brought pain. Caleb Morgan didn't answer right away. He stood at the foot of the bed where this stranger lay, this half-frozen woman he'd pulled from a snowdrift at midnight, and he felt something move through his chest that he hadn't felt in 7 years. Then he said it, low, almost angry. Too late. And God help him, he meant it. If this story already has, you drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this has traveled. Subscribe and stay until the very end. You will not regret it. The blizzard came without warning, which was a lie Montana told every winter. Every rancher within 200 miles knew the signs. The way the sky turned the color of old bone in the late afternoon, the way the wind shifted from northwest to dead west and stopped smelling like pine and started smelling like nothing at all. Nothing meant ice. Nothing meant days. Caleb Morgan knew all of this. He had ranched this land for 16 years, buried his father here, buried his wife here, and learned the language of this territory the hard way, which was the only way Montana ever taught anything. So when the sky went bone white at 3 in the afternoon, on the 14th of December, 1879, Caleb did exactly what a sensible man would do. He checked his stock, doubled the hay in the barn, brought his 2 horses inside, stacked extra wood against the cabin wall, and told himself he was finished for the night. He was inside for exactly 40 minutes before he heard it. Not the wind. He knew the wind. This was something under the wind, a sound that didn't belong to storms or animals or the ordinary violence of a Montana winter. He stood at his front window and stared out at nothing, because nothing was all there was. White wall of snow, darkness inside white, the world reduced to about 10 feet of visibility in every direction. He told himself it was a branch. He sat back down. He stood up again 30 seconds later, pulled his coat off the hook, and walked out into the blizzard without fully deciding to. That was the thing about Caleb Morgan that most people in Gardner understood without being able to explain it. He didn't always make decisions. Sometimes his body simply moved toward whatever needed to be done, and his mind caught up somewhere later, usually when it was too cold or too late to turn back. The wind hit him like a wall the moment he cleared the porch. He pulled his hat down, pulled his scarf up, and walked into it. He found the wagon 40 yards from his fence line. It had gone off the road what passed for a road out here and hit the shallow embankment along the east side of the property. One wheel was gone entirely. The other 3 were half buried. The horse that had been pulling it was nowhere. Either it had broken free of the traces, or something had cut it loose. In this visibility, in this cold, Caleb didn't spend time theorizing. He went to the wagon bed first. Nothing. Supplies scattered, a wooden trunk split open, what had been someone's belongings, now being swallowed by snow. He went around to the front. She was on the ground between the traces, curled on her side. And if the snow hadn't been white and she hadn't been wearing a dark coat, he would have walked right past her. He dropped to one knee. "Hey." He put his hand on her shoulder. "Hey." Nothing. He pulled off his glove and pressed 2 fingers to her throat. The pulse was there, faint, irregular, the kind that meant the body was still negotiating. He got his arms under her, one at her back and one beneath her knees, and stood up. She was lighter than he expected. That scared him more than the pulse. He carried her back to the cabin. He didn't take time to be careful about it. He got her inside, got her coat off. It was soaked through, frozen at the shoulders, and got her onto the bed in the back room. He built the fire in that room higher than he normally would have, enough that the heat pressed against him like a hand, and he pulled off her boots and her outer layers and covered her with every blanket he owned. Her hands were the color of old wax. Her lips were the color of slate. He sat in the chair beside the bed and watched her breathe. He had done this once before, 16 years ago, with a different woman in a different circumstance. A woman who had eventually become his wife, who had eventually died of fever, in this same cabin, in this same back room, in a bed that still had her impression in it, if you knew where to look. He didn't think about that now. He watched the woman in front of him breathe. Her breathing changed around the second hour, deepened, evened out, lost that shallow catching quality that meant the body was fighting to remember how. The color in her face shifted from gray toward something closer to human. Around the third hour she moved. Just her hand, it pulled the blanket tighter, a small unconscious grasping. Caleb leaned forward. Around the fourth hour she opened her eyes. They were brown. Dark brown, the kind that looked almost black in firelight. She stared at the ceiling for a moment, the ceiling of a strange cabin, a strange room, and Caleb watched her figure out where she was and watched the fear come in behind the figuring. She turned her head and found him sitting in the chair. She didn't scream. She didn't lunge away. She went very, very still, the way prey animals went still. Not calm, not safe, just performing stillness as a survival strategy. "You're all right," Caleb said. "You were half frozen. I brought you inside." She didn't answer. "My name is Caleb Morgan. This is my ranch. You're about 4 miles northeast of Gardner." Still nothing. "I'm going to get you some water," he said. "I'll leave the door open so you can hear where I am." He said that last part deliberately. He didn't know why he knew to say it, just that something in the way she held herself suggested that knowing where the only other person in the building was mattered to her more than most things right now. He got the water. He left the door open. When he came back, she was sitting up against the headboard, the blanket pulled to her chin, watching the doorway. He crossed to the bedside and set the cup on the table without handing it to her directly. She'd take it when she was ready, or she wouldn't take it at all, and either way was her business. She took it after a moment, drank slowly. Her hands were shaking. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was rough from cold, from whatever she'd been through. "Wagon's buried," he said. "Your horse is gone. Storm's going to run at least 2 more days." He watched something move across her face, not quite fear, not quite calculation. More like a woman rapidly reorganizing everything she'd planned to do, and finding none of it was possible anymore. "I can stay in the barn," she said. "No, you can't. I don't want to be any... In this temperature and your condition, you'd be dead before morning." He said it flatly, not unkindly. "You'll stay in here. I'll take the chair." "I'm not..." She stopped, started again. "You don't know me. I know you were half buried in a snowdrift on my property, and your pulse was about 3 beats from stopping." He met her eyes. "That's enough for tonight." She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her trying to figure out what his angle was, what this kindness cost, what he expected in return for it. He recognized that look. He had seen it in animals that had been treated badly and then found themselves somewhere unexpectedly safe and couldn't decide whether the safety was real. "What's your name?" he asked. A pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Evelyn," she said. "Evelyn Harper." He nodded. He didn't ask for more. "Get some sleep, Miss Harper. I'll be in the front room if you need anything." He got up. She watched him go. At the door, he paused without turning. "The latch on that door works from the inside. You can use it if it makes you feel better." He heard her sharp intake of breath, surprise, not fear. Something between relief and disbelief, like a woman who had forgotten that such a small courtesy was possible. He went to the front room and sat in his chair and listened to the blizzard run itself against his walls. After a few minutes, he heard the latch click. The storm didn't break the next day, or the day after that. Montana in December was not interested in mercy, and this particular system had come down out of Canada with the kind of patience and ferocity that reminded everyone who lived out here exactly how temporary and irrelevant they were. By the second morning, Evelyn was well enough to sit at the kitchen table and eat actual food. Caleb made what he always made: oatmeal salt pork black coffee. He set a plate in front of her without ceremony and sat across from her with his own, and they ate in silence for a while. And the silence was not entirely uncomfortable, which surprised him. She was noticing things. He could see it. Her eyes moving around the cabin, cataloging the way a person did when they were trying to understand an environment they'd been dropped into without consent. She looked at his shelves, practical, Nothing decorative, except a photograph on the mantel that she looked at and then looked away from quickly when she realized he'd caught her looking. "My wife," he said. She looked back at the photograph. She was beautiful. "Yes." "How long ago?" "7 years." She nodded, went back to her coffee. Then, "I'm sorry." "So am I." He said it without bitterness or performance, just a fact that lived in the room with them. A few minutes passed. "You're not going to ask me what I was doing out there," Evelyn said. It wasn't quite a question. No. Most people would. Most people aren't any of my business either. She looked at him across the table with an expression that was difficult to read, like someone receiving a gift they hadn't asked for and didn't know the protocol for accepting. "It was an accident," she said carefully. "The storm came up faster than I expected. I wasn't familiar with the road." "All right," he said. She waited. He didn't push. He ate his salt pork and drank his coffee and looked out the window at the wall of white pressing against the glass, and after a moment she went back to eating too. But he had noticed the way she said it. It was an accident. The small over-precision of it, the way it had the quality of a sentence, rehearsed in advance for strangers who would ask questions. He had also noticed when he helped her get her coat off, 2 nights ago, in the urgent business of keeping her alive, the yellow-green shadows along her left rib cage, old enough to be fading, new enough to still hurt when she moved wrong. He noticed all of it. He said nothing. By the 3rd day, a kind of routine had developed between them, the way routines develop between people forced into proximity by weather, not planned, not discussed, just established through repetition until it felt like it had always been there. Caleb rose. First always made the fire, started the coffee. Evelyn came out of the back room 20 minutes later, hair pinned back, moving more steadily than she had 2 days before. And she'd taken over the oatmeal without asking, because she'd apparently decided that if she was occupying his house, she was going to earn it. He didn't argue. He drank his coffee and let her cook. They ate together. They spoke when something needed to be said and were quiet when it didn't. In the afternoons, when the snow was simply a fact to be endured rather than actively fought, Caleb sat by the window and worked on the harness leather that had been needing repair since October, and Evelyn sat at the other end of the table with a book she'd found on his shelf, a worn copy of Dickens that had been his wife's, and read. He found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, not the way a man watches a woman he wants something from. More the way a man watches something fragile that has found its way into an unexpected shelter. Careful, slightly astonished, not wanting to move too quickly and break whatever tentative peace had been established. She held herself differently when she thought no one was paying attention. Looser. Some bracing thing she carried in her shoulders and jaw went slack, and she looked younger and she looked not happy exactly, but resting. On the 3rd afternoon, she looked up from the Dickens and found him watching her, and for just a moment, she didn't perform anything, didn't pull back, didn't recalibrate. She just looked at him, looking at her. "You're very quiet," she said. "I live alone." Most people who live alone talk more, not less, filling the silence. Silence doesn't bother me. She considered that. It used to terrify me. He set down the harness. Used to, before I understood that silence was better than the alternative. She said it simply, already looking back at her book, like she hadn't just handed him something significant. He picked the harness back up. He didn't say anything. But his hands had gone still for a moment, just a moment, before he started working again. That evening, she helped him with the horses. He hadn't asked her to. She had simply put on her coat. His spare coat, her own still damp, and followed him out to the barn without explanation, and he hadn't sent her back. The 2 horses, a big bay gelding named Justice, and a shorter roan mare, with no name, because Caleb had always meant to name her, and never had both regarded Evelyn with the careful interest horses reserved for strangers who didn't come in smelling of fear. "What's her name?" Evelyn asked already at the roan's stall, letting the mare smell her hand. "Hasn't got one." She turned and looked at him like he'd said something genuinely offensive. "You've had her how long?" "3 years. Caleb." It was the first time she'd used his first name. He noticed it. He didn't show that he noticed it. "She knows when I'm calling her. Every living creature deserves a name." She turned back to the mare who was pressing her nose into Evelyn's palm with the trusting shamelessness of horses who have decided a person is acceptable. "I'm going to call her Clara." "That's not your horse to name." "No, but someone has to." She stroked the mare's nose. "Hello, Clara." Clara blew a long breath into her palm. Caleb watched this happen and felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for so long he'd stopped noticing the tension. "Clara," he said, testing it. The roan's ear swiveled toward him. He turned away before Evelyn could see his face. The night of the third day was when it first went wrong. Not between them, between her and whatever she was carrying, that she hadn't put down yet. Caleb woke at around 2 in the morning to a sound from the back room. Not loud, he was a light sleeper, the kind that years of living alone on working land made you, but wrong enough to pull him up out of the chair where he'd been sleeping. He went to the door, listened. She was talking. Fast, low, urgent, not to him, not to anyone in the room, the frantic, specific cadence of a nightmare. He couldn't make out words. He could make out the tone, the quality of someone apologizing, explaining, defending themselves. He stood in the doorway. "Evelyn?" She didn't wake. "Evelyn." Louder. She came up out of it with a sound like someone surfacing from deep water, a gasp, a lurch upright, and then immediate silence. The trained silence of someone who had learned fast that sounds in the night brought consequences. He stayed in the doorway. "You were having a nightmare." A pause. "I know." Her voice was steady, controlled. "I'm sorry I woke you." "You didn't." He had been awake. He didn't explain why. "Do you want water?" "No." He waited a moment. "All right." He started to turn back. "Caleb." He stopped. "I'm going to leave," she said. "When the storm breaks. I'll go to Gardner. I'll figure out the next—" She stopped, started again. "I don't want you to think I'm expecting—" "Stop." Silence. "You don't have to decide what you're expecting tonight at 2 in the morning, he said. "The storm hasn't broken. Go back to sleep." A long pause. "You don't have to be kind to me," she said. And the way she said it, not ungrateful, not deflecting, just genuinely confused. Like kindness was a language she was no longer fluent in. Something moved through him. He kept his voice level. "I'm not being kind," he said. "I'm being practical. Sick, half-frozen woman trying to plan her future in the middle of the night isn't useful to either of us." A silence. Then very quietly. "All right. Good night, Miss Harper." "Good night, Caleb." He went back to his chair. He sat for a long time in the dark, listening to the blizzard working itself out against the walls of his cabin, and after a while, he heard her breathing change on the other side of the door, deepen and slow. He didn't sleep for another 2 hours. He was trying to understand what had just happened to him. Not the rescue, not the practical work of keeping someone alive. The other part. The part where she said, "You don't have to be kind to me," and something in his chest had answered before his mind could stop it. He had buried his wife 7 years ago. He had not let anything in since. He was beginning to understand that this might be the problem. The blizzard broke on the morning of the 5th day. The silence was what woke him, the sudden absolute absence of that constant howling pressure that had become the background music of the last week. He sat up, and the cabin was quiet, and pale winter light was coming in around the edge of the shutter. He opened the front door. The world outside was enormous and white and exhausted the way the world always looked after a storm of that kind, hollowed-out calm, almost apologetic. He stood on the porch and breathed cold, clean air and thought about the fact that the roads would be open within a day, maybe 2. Gardner was accessible. She could leave. He thought about that. He went inside and made coffee. She came out of the back room 20 minutes later as usual. She looked at the light in the window. Real light, not the strange diffused glow of the storm, and she went very still for a moment. "It stopped," she said. "Last night sometime." She sat down at the table. He put coffee in front of her. For a while they were both quiet. "I'll go tomorrow," she said. "If the road is clear enough." "It will be." She nodded. She was looking at the coffee cup. "I want you to know that I'm—" She stopped. Tried again. "What you did, bringing me in from the cold, letting me stay. Not—" Another stop. "You didn't have to do any of it." "No," he agreed. "Most people wouldn't have." "Can't speak for most people." She looked up at him. Her eyes were doing something complicated. "You don't have to love me," she said. It came out quiet, not flirtatious, not a proposition. More like a preemptive absolution. "I release you from any obligation this forced proximity might have created. I know how this looks. I know what you might feel obligated to offer. You don't have to." He looked at her across the table for a long moment. "Too late," he said. She blinked. He picked up his coffee and looked out the window at the white world and didn't say anything else. She sat across from him and said nothing either, and the fire was burning, and the storm was gone, and the morning was quiet, and neither of them moved for a very long time. It was Tom Morrison who told him. Tom ran the saloon in Gardner, a raw-boned man in his 50s. Sharp eyes, slow words, the kind of man who saw everything in a room and chose very carefully what he responded to. Caleb had known him for 12 years. He trusted him the way he trusted the weather completely, and with no illusions about what it was. Caleb rode into Gardner the next afternoon on justice, leaving Evelyn at the cabin. She'd protested, said she would come with him, and he'd told her the road was still too rough for 2 horses, and that he'd be back before dark. She had not looked pleased about being left behind. He found that he respected that. Tom was behind the bar when Caleb came in. The saloon was quiet a weekday afternoon, the bad road still keeping most of the regulars at home. 2 old men at a corner table playing cards. Nobody else. Tom set a cup of coffee on the bar without being asked. Caleb sat down. Storm didn't get into town too bad. Lost 2 panes off the Morrison place. Roof held. Tom leaned on the bar. "Heard you pulled someone out of the North Road." News moved fast in Gardner, even when the roads were closed. Caleb had lived here long enough not to be surprised by this. "Wagon went off the embankment. Woman alone." Tom nodded slowly, said nothing for a moment. "What's her name?" he said. Something in the way he asked it, careful, deliberate, the way Tom said everything that actually mattered, made Caleb look at him directly. "Why?" Tom reached under the bar and came up with a piece of paper. He set it on the bar between them without a word. Caleb picked it up. It was a notice. Printed, not handwritten, which meant money, which meant organization, which meant someone who had access to a print shop and didn't care who knew it. At the top, "Missing woman." And below that, a physical description that was accurate enough to be deliberate. Brown hair, dark eyes, approximately mid-20s. At the bottom, $200, contact Victor Brennan through the Helena office of Brennan Freight. Caleb set the paper down. "When did this come in?" he said. "Ryder brought 3 of them, day before the storm hit." Tom's voice was level. "Posted 1 at the station, 1 here. Told the rider I'd put the 3rd up at the crossroads." "Did you—" Tom looked at him steadily. "I forgot." Caleb nodded once. "Victor Brennan," Tom said. "You know that name?" "I know the freight company. Everybody knows the freight company. Man himself is something else." Tom picked up the notice and folded it twice and put it back under the bar. "Came through here 2 winters back on the way to a land deal. Big man, loud, bought rounds for the whole room." He paused. "Also grabbed my barmaid by the wrist when she didn't pour fast enough. Left a bruise." Caleb said nothing. "She his wife," Tom said. A long pause. "That's not something she's told me," Caleb said. Which was true. Also, not an answer. Tom nodded slow. "All right." He refilled Caleb's coffee. All right. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, someone's horse was tied at the rail, shifting restlessly in the cold. He's going to send someone, Tom said. If she's been gone long enough. I know. You need anything? I know, Caleb said again. He stood up, put money on the bar that Tom would not take. I'll be back when the road settles. He rode back in the cold afternoon light, justice moving steady and purposeful beneath him, and he thought about yellow-green shadows along a woman's ribs. He thought about the way she woke at 2 a.m, explaining herself to someone who wasn't in the room. He thought about, "You don't have to be kind to me," said, in the voice of someone who had learned that kindness was not free. He thought about what he was writing back to. He thought about what he intended to do about it. By the time his cabin came into view, the chimney trailing a thin line of wood smoke against the pale sky, she had kept the fire going. He had made no decisions exactly, but his body already knew what it was going to do. That was how it worked with him. His body simply moved toward whatever needed to be done. The question this time was what it would cost. He rode up to the barn, put Justice in his stall, and stood for a moment in the dim barn interior, in the smell of horses and hay, and let himself be very clear with himself for just one moment. He was not a man who let things in. He had not let anything in for 7 years by design, by discipline, by the deliberate decision that the pain of loss was not something he was willing to go through again. He had pulled a woman out of a snowdrift. He had watched her name a horse. He had heard her say, "You don't have to love me," and answered before he could stop himself. He was already past the part where decisions could be made. The question now was what came next. He walked out of the barn and across the yard to the cabin and knocked twice before he opened his own door, because it was her space now too, and some part of him understood that. She was standing at the window. She had been watching for him. When the door opened, she turned, and the relief on her face lasted exactly 1 second before she controlled it, but he saw it. She had been afraid he wouldn't come back. He thought about that, about what kind of life made a woman afraid that someone who said they'd return before dark might simply not. "Roads are settling," he said. "Good." Her voice was even. "I spoke to Tom Morrison. He runs the saloon." She went still. "He had some news," Caleb said. He watched her face move through about 4 things in rapid succession: fear, resignation, the calculation of how much he knew, and underneath all of it, the deep, exhausted grief of someone whose past had just caught up with the only safe place they'd managed to find. "Caleb," she started. "You don't have to explain anything tonight," he said, her mouth closed. "I need to feed the horses," he said. "Supper in an hour." He hung up his coat. He went back out to the barn. He took longer than he needed to with the horses giving her time. When he came back inside, she was standing at the stove with her back to him. Her shoulders were rigid. She was either about to speak or about to fall apart, and he had the sense she hadn't decided which yet. "He sent men," she said, without turning around. "Not yet, but he will." "Yes." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "He always does." Caleb sat down at the table. "Then we have some time before that becomes a problem." She turned. Her eyes were dry. She was not a woman who fell apart easily. He was learning, which told him something about how long she'd had to be strong in conditions where falling apart was not an option. "You're not afraid of him," she said. It was not a question, more like something she couldn't fully understand. "I'm not interested in him," Caleb said. "There's a difference." She looked at him for a long moment. "Caleb," she said, "you should understand what you're—" "I understand enough." He looked at her steadily. "Sit down, Evelyn. Let's have supper." She looked at the table. She looked at him. Something passed across her face that he would spend a long time afterward trying to identify, not hope, exactly because hope was too fragile a word for what appeared in her eyes in that moment. Something more like the moment when a person who has been running for a very long time lets themselves stop just briefly, just for a breath, and feels the ground solid under their feet and cannot quite believe it will hold. She sat down. He put the food on the table. Outside, the night came down fast and cold and clear, the clean cold of after storm, the sky enormous and indifferent and brilliant with stars. And inside the cabin the fire burned, and two people sat across from each other at a small table and ate in the particular silence of people who have said more than they intended to and are still deciding what it means. Somewhere out in that vast cold dark, the freight roads were clearing, and somewhere along those roads something was coming. But not tonight. Tonight there was just the fire and the food, and the woman across the table who had said, "You don't have to love me," and the man who had already answered her, and neither of them looking directly at the other, and both of them very aware of the other's breathing. That was enough for tonight. Tomorrow would come with everything it was going to bring. Tonight was its own thing, and Caleb Morgan, who had not let anything in for 7 years, who had built his walls, brick by careful brick, and called it wisdom, sat across from Evelyn Harper, and felt those walls do something he had not prepared for. They didn't fall. They simply became, for the first time, beside the point. She didn't leave the next day. She had intended to. Caleb knew she had intended to because she came to breakfast with that particular quality of stillness that meant a decision had been made, coat already on the hook by the door, the small bundle of dried-out belongings she'd salvaged from the wagon sitting near the entrance, like a statement of intent. He didn't say anything about it. He made coffee. He put oatmeal on the table. He sat down across from her and ate. She ate too. She drank her coffee. She looked out the window at the road. The road was still bad. Not impassable, but bad enough that a woman on foot with no horse carrying whatever she was carrying in ways he still didn't fully understand would be in genuine difficulty before she got 2 miles. She knew this. He knew she knew this. Neither of them mentioned it. After breakfast, she took her coat off the hook and hung it back on the peg. She picked up the Dickens from the table where she'd left it the night before. She sat down and opened it, and read, and Caleb went out to check the fence line along the east pasture, and when he came back 2 hours later, she was still there. That was how the second stretch began. Not with an announcement or a renegotiation, just with a coat moving from one hook back to another, and two people pretending not to notice what that meant. The days that followed had a different quality from the storm days. During the blizzard, they'd been trapped together, and that had its own forced intimacy. You couldn't resent the proximity because the storm justified it, excused it, gave it a frame. Now the storm was gone. She was staying by choice, even if that choice was partly constrained by road and horse and money, and that changed everything in ways neither of them had vocabulary for yet. She started pulling weight around the ranch without being asked, not tentatively, not performatively. She just identified what needed doing and did it. She fed Clara every morning before Caleb was out of bed, learning the mare's rhythms, with that particular attention she gave to things she'd decided mattered. She mended a split in the kitchen chair back using a piece of leather she found in the barn without asking permission. And when Caleb came in and found it fixed, he looked at it for a moment, and then at her, and she looked back at him levelly, daring him to make something of it. He didn't. "Where'd you learn that?" he said. "My father had horses." She turned back to what she was doing. "I wasn't decorative growing up." He stored that away. Not her husband, not Helena, not the life she'd run from her father horses, a childhood where she'd been taught to use her hands. He was building a picture from the edges inward, which was the only way she was letting him build it, and he understood that was the terms of this thing between them, so he accepted those terms. She was learning him too. He caught her watching the way he moved, not with any heat in it, not yet just the careful study of someone mapping an unfamiliar landscape for exits and dangers. But what she was finding, he could tell, was not what she expected to find. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam things. He didn't fill silences with demands. He asked before he reached across her for something on the table. He knocked before he opened the back room door. Small things. Things that shouldn't matter, and apparently to her mattered enormously. The third morning after the storm, she handed him his coffee before he reached for it. Just that. Handed him the cup, her hand steady looking somewhere just past his shoulder. He took it. He said thank you. She nodded and went to sit down. He stood with the cup and understood from the way her breathing had been slightly held in that moment that it was the first time in a long time she'd done something for a man without being afraid of what would happen next. He didn't make anything of it. He drank his coffee and went out to work. But the fact of it stayed with him all day. It was on the fourth day that the first real crack appeared. He came in from the afternoon chores to find her standing at the kitchen table with her back to the door, and he knew immediately something was wrong. Not from the posture exactly, but from the quality of the stillness. She had a different stillness when she was reading or thinking, and a different one again when something had frightened her, and this was the latter. On the table in front of her was a piece of paper. He recognized it before he got close enough to read it, another notice, the same printed format as the one Tom had shown him. This one must have been carried by the wind or dropped by whoever Tom's rider had given them to for posting. It had been caught in the fence line. He'd seen something white out there and assumed it was debris, and apparently she had gone out to clear the fence and found it instead. She didn't turn around when he came in. She knew he was there. "How long have you known?" she said. "Tom showed me one when I went to town." "And you didn't tell me?" "No." She turned then. Her face was controlled, but her eyes were doing something complicated. Not quite anger, not quite betrayal. Somewhere in between and underneath both of those something raw. "That wasn't your decision to make," she said. "You're right." He didn't flinch from it. "I didn't want to scare you before I knew more about what we were dealing with. We." She said the word like it was foreign. "It's not your problem, Caleb. It became mine when I pulled you out of that snowdrift. That's not how it works. You did a decent thing. That doesn't make you responsible for—" "I know how responsibility works," he said. "And I know what I'm taking on." He crossed to the table and stood on the other side of it from her. "The question is, what you want to do?" She stared at him. "What I want to do." "That's what I said." Something shifted in her expression, the anger recalibrating around something she hadn't expected, which was to be asked. He could see it plainly. She had been bracing for him to tell her what would happen, what she would do, where she would go. Being asked instead had knocked her slightly sideways. "I want to not be found," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she probably intended. "I want to—" She stopped, pressed her fingers against the edge of the table. "I want to be somewhere that he can't reach me. And I know that's not realistic. And I know it's not—" "Why isn't it realistic?" She looked at him. "Because Victor Brennan has money and connections and the kind of reputation that makes sheriffs cooperate with him. Because the law in this territory is largely whatever wealthy men decide it is. Because I have nothing." She said the last word without self-pity, just clean and factual. "I walked out with what I could carry, and I lost half of that in the wagon. I have nothing." "You have time," Caleb said. "And you have Tom Morrison, who has already forgotten to post one of those notices. And you have me." She was quiet for a moment. "Why?" she said, not challenging, genuinely asking the real question underneath all the other questions. "You don't know me. You owe me nothing. You have your ranch, your life, your—" She gestured at the cabin, the walls, everything he'd built here. "Why would you risk any of this?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I had a wife," he said. "Margaret. She was sick for a long time before she died. Fever that came and went and kept coming back. I spent the last year of her life watching her fight something I couldn't fight for her." He paused. "I've been standing still since then. Not by accident. I decided standing still was the only safe way to be. That's not an answer to my question. I'm getting there." He put his hands flat on the table. "You said it yourself. You want to be somewhere he can't reach you. I'm asking why that somewhere can't be here for now while we figure out what comes next." She stared at him. "That's still not why," she said. "Because I'm tired of standing still," he said. "And you need somewhere to stand." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, Justice was moving in the barn, the soft, heavy sound of a large animal shifting its weight. The fire popped once. She looked down at the notice on the table. Then she picked it up and folded it deliberately and held it. "He'll send Hank Ridley," she said. Her voice had changed, flattened slightly, the way voices flattened when a person was describing something they'd been dreading. "That's who he uses, for things he wants done." "Tell me about him." She looked up. The fact that he asked, didn't recoil, didn't say, "I don't need to know," just said, "Tell me," seemed to brace her somehow. "He's not..." She thought about how to say it. "He's not what he looks like. He looks like a hired hand. He's not. He's intelligent, and he's patient, and he does exactly what Victor pays him to do, and he does it without any of the conscience that might slow other men down." She paused. "He found a woman in Denver once who'd left her husband, found her in 3 weeks." "That's not 3 weeks ago," Caleb said. "And Denver is not a ranch 4 miles from a town that's already disposed of a notice." Something flickered in her expression. Not hope yet, but the precursor to it, the willingness to consider that hope might be possible. "You're very calm about this," she said. "Getting worked up doesn't help the horses get fed." That startled her into something that was almost a laugh, not quite, but close enough that it moved across her face and changed it briefly into something lighter. She covered it quickly. But he'd seen it. "Sit down," he said. "I'll make more coffee, and you're going to tell me whatever you're willing to tell me, and we'll figure out what we actually know." She sat down. He made the coffee. And Evelyn Harper, who had not trusted anyone in longer than she could clearly remember, began to talk. Not everything. Not yet. But she started, and that was the thing that mattered. She told him about Helena first, about what Victor Brennan looked like from the outside, which was respectable and large and successful. A man who owned freight lines across 3 territories and had dinner with the territorial governor twice a year and gave generously to the church-building fund. She described the wedding the way you describe something that happened to someone else. The dress, the guests, the polite applause, and then she stopped and moved directly to the first winter, which was when she understood what she'd married. He didn't... She chose her words carefully, the precision of someone who had replayed these events many times trying to understand them. It wasn't immediately violent. It was a dismantling first. He was very good at that. Taking apart the things you thought were true about yourself and replacing them with his version. She looked at the coffee cup. By the time the first time happened, I had already been made to believe I'd deserved it. Caleb said nothing. He kept his face still and his hands around his cup, and he listened. "I tried to leave once before," she said. "A year in. I got as far as the stage station. He came himself, didn't make a scene, just walked me back to the carriage and closed the door, and on the way home, he explained very clearly what would happen if I tried again." She paused. "And I believed him, because everything else he'd told me had been accurate." "But you left." She looked up. "I left because I ran out of time." She put her hand briefly to her midsection. Just for a second. Then she took it away. Caleb understood what she was telling him. He didn't react externally. He was careful about that, careful not to make her feel observed. But something shifted in the architecture of his understanding of this situation, of the urgency of it, of what was truly at stake for this woman who was sitting across from him, drinking coffee in his cabin. "How far along?" he said quietly. She looked at him steadily, checking for judgment for some shift in the way he was regarding her. She found none. 4 months, she said. A silence. "He doesn't know," she said. "Or he didn't when I left. He may have guessed." Another pause. "It changes the timeline." "Yes," Caleb said. "It does." They sat with that for a moment. "I should have told you," she said. "You told me when you were ready to." "You're still doing that," she said. "That thing where you don't make it worse." "Is that unusual?" She looked at him. The answer was clear from her face. He refilled her coffee. The afternoon moved around them. The light shifted, the fire needed tending. Outside, the temperature dropped as the sun went behind the ridge. Caleb got up and added wood to the fire, and she watched him do it and said nothing. And when he sat back down, the quality of silence between them, was different from what it had been at the start of this conversation. Not comfortable exactly, but honest, which was rarer and better. "He's going to send Ridley soon," she said. "If he hasn't already. Ridley's got to move slow in these roads, same as everyone. He'll ask in town. Someone will say something. Tom won't. Tom doesn't know everyone." "No," Caleb said, "but he knows enough." He looked at her. "What you need is time. Time and distance. And if we can manage it, something legal. Something that makes it harder for him to claim you." She went very still. "I know a lawyer in Miles City," Caleb said. "Franklin Greer. He's handled property cases out here for 20 years. What Brennan's doing, the reward notice, the implications in the language of it, that's not legal process. That's a wealthy man using money in place of law. There's a difference, and Greer knows how to argue the difference. That takes money," she said. "I have some." "Caleb, we can argue about that later." His voice was firm, not loud firm. "Right now we're dealing with what's in front of us." She pressed her lips together. He could see her wanting to argue, to insist on the precise accounting of what she owed him and what she didn't. He could also see her recognizing somewhere underneath the pride that she was not in a position to refuse help on principle. "There's something else," she said. He waited. "When I left..." She hesitated. "I took something. From the house. From his office." She reached into the pocket of the jacket she was wearing, his spare jacket, still her things not yet dry enough for full use, and produced a small folded packet of papers. She put them on the table between them. He looked at them without touching them. "What are these?" "Correspondence. Between Victor and a land agent in Billings. And between the land agent and a territorial surveyor." She watched him. "There are parcels in the survey that don't match the registered deeds. Land that's been recorded twice, once to the original homesteaders and once to Brennan Freight, using survey reports that have been altered." Caleb looked up from the papers to her face. "Victor has been acquiring land through the freight business," she said. "Routes that run through contested parcels. He pays the surveyors to mark boundaries incorrectly on the official records, then uses the freight contracts as proof of prior use when the homesteaders can't produce matching paperwork." She said this clearly, with the precision of someone who had spent time understanding it. "I found it by accident. I was looking for something else in his files, and I found this instead." "How long ago?" 3 weeks before I left." She paused. "It's part of why I left when I did. I realized that what I knew made me more dangerous to him than just a wife who wanted out." The fire popped. The light was going outside, the short winter afternoon already closing down. Caleb picked up the papers and looked at them carefully, not reading every line, but scanning, taking in the shape of it. Names, dates, parcel numbers, the careful language of correspondence between men who knew what they were doing was wrong, and had decided that knowing it was wrong was not sufficient reason to stop. "This is federal land fraud," he said. "Yes." "The kind that doesn't stay in territorial courts." "Yes." He set the papers down, looked at her. "You've been carrying this since Helena," he said. "I didn't know what else to do with it." She met his eyes. "I thought if I could get somewhere safe, I could figure out who to take it to. Someone who wouldn't be reachable by him." "You can't take it to the territorial office, not with his connections there." "I know." "Federal marshal's the play," Caleb said. "Or a federal attorney, Miles City or further east." She nodded. She had clearly been thinking along the same lines, had maybe been thinking along these lines the whole time, waiting to find someone she trusted enough to think out loud with. "This is leverage," he said. "If he finds you and tries to use the law to force your return, this complicates his position considerably. Only if we can get it to the right person before he gets to me. Then that's what we're working toward." She looked at him across the table. In the fading light, her face was very clear. Not soft, not afraid, but something he hadn't seen there before. Resolution. The kind that came from having a plan, instead of just a direction to run. "You're very certain," she said. "I'm very stubborn," he said. "There's a difference." This time she actually smiled. Small brief, the first real one he'd seen, it appeared and was gone quickly, like she'd startled herself with it. But it had been there, and she hadn't hidden it in time. He let it go without comment. "I need to ride to Tom's tomorrow," he said. "I want to know if anyone's asked questions in town." "I'll come with you." He started to shake his head. "I'm not staying here alone," she said, and her voice was level but absolute. "I know you think it's safer. It isn't. Not for me. Being in this cabin alone waiting for you to come back." She stopped. He watched her choose the honest thing over the manageable thing. "I don't do well with waiting anymore. I used to. I don't anymore." He understood what she was telling him. She'd spent too much time waiting in rooms while someone else controlled what was going to happen. "All right," he said. "We leave early, before the road gets traffic." She nodded. He got up to start supper. She got up to help, moving to the other side of the small kitchen, and they worked together in the close quarters with the practiced care of people who had learned each other's movements, stepping around rather than colliding, reaching past without asking, because they'd already established the geography of this space between them. At one point, they reached for the same shelf at the same moment, and his hand closed over hers, briefly. An accident, a half second, and she went still, and he went still, and then he took what he'd reached for, and stepped back and said nothing, and she turned back to what she was doing, and the moment passed. But it did not disappear. It remained in the room with them all through supper, a particular electricity that neither of them acknowledged, and neither of them stopped feeling, the kind that builds in small spaces between people who are being careful not to want too much. After supper, she helped clear the table, and she said goodnight and went to the back room, and he heard the latch turn. Not from fear this time, he thought. Just privacy. Just a woman drawing the boundary of herself at the end of a day in which she had given away more than she'd planned to. He sat by the fire. He thought about 4 months and land fraud documents, and a man named Hank Ridley, who found people in 3 weeks. He thought about a woman learning to trust a stranger in a cabin in the Montana winter, the slow, careful work of it, and how fragile it was, and how important. He thought about his hands, the work they knew how to do, the fixing, and the building, and the holding together of things that wanted to fall apart. He had been standing still for 7 years. He was not standing still anymore. The fire burned down, and he let it go to coals, and sat in the dark for a long time, before he finally slept. And in the morning, he rose before light and made the coffee, and listened for the sound of the latch opening on the back room door. It opened when it always did, 20 minutes after the coffee started, when the smell had drifted far enough back. She came out with her hair pinned and his jacket on, and her eyes clear and ready, and she looked at him, and he looked at her, and they did not say good morning because that was not a thing they'd established yet. But the silence between them had warmth in it, which was something, which was in fact quite a lot. He handed her the coffee. She took it, and her hand was steady. They rode to Gardner an hour after sunup. Evelyn on Clara, moving with the competence of someone who genuinely had grown up around horses, the mare responding to her with the uncomplicated ease of an animal that had decided to trust. Caleb on Justice, slightly ahead on the narrower stretches, watching the road. Gardner in the post-storm morning was quiet. The kind of quiet that came after sustained weather. People still reassessing what the storm had taken and what it had left. Tom Morrison was already at the saloon, not yet open for business, but unlocked the fire going. He looked at Evelyn when they came in, not with surprise. Tom Morrison was not a man easily surprised, but with the careful assessment of someone who was now putting a face to a situation he'd already agreed to take a position on. "Tom," Caleb said. "This is Evelyn Harper. She's staying at the ranch while she gets her bearings." Tom extended his hand across the bar. "Tom Morrison, good to meet you, Miss Harper." "Yeah." She shook it without hesitation, which Caleb noticed, and stored away the distinction she'd drawn between men she was learning and men she'd already assessed. "Anyone been asking questions?" Caleb said. Tom's expression shifted slightly. "Not much, but enough." "Ryder came through yesterday afternoon," Tom said. "Not local. Asked the woman at the dry goods if anyone had seen a woman on the North Road around the time of the storm." The air in the room changed. "What did she say?" Caleb asked. She said she'd heard someone got pulled off the North Road by the Morgan Ranch, and she didn't know any more than that. Tom paused. Sarah's a good woman, and she's not a liar. She told him what she knew. Did the writer say who he was? Didn't give a name. Big man. Cold eyes. Tom looked at Evelyn directly. Go by the name Ridley. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Yes. He went to the telegraph office, Tom said. Sent a wire, then he rode south. But he'll be back. How long? Caleb asked. Day, maybe 2. He's waiting on something, instructions or money or both. Tom leaned on the bar. He's methodical, asked questions slow, like he was making sure he had the right answer before he moved. Evelyn said nothing. She was holding her coffee cup and looking at a point on the bar that had nothing on it. He doesn't know she's at my ranch, Caleb said. Sarah told him what she heard. That gives us something. It gives you a short window, Tom said. Once he starts asking more carefully, the ranch is the obvious place. I know. Caleb looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him. The documents, she said quietly. He nodded. Tom looked between them. What documents? Something that changes the shape of this situation, Caleb said. I need to get word to Franklin Greer in Miles City. Can you send a wire through your contact at the station without it going through the main telegraph? Tom was quiet for a moment. Takes longer, he said. That's fine. What do you want the wire to say? Tell him Caleb Morgan has a federal land matter requiring urgent attention and a situation requiring legal counsel with some speed. He paused. He'll know what it means. Tom nodded slowly. He looked at Evelyn again, a long look, the kind that was summing up rather than questioning. Then he reached under the bar and pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil. I'll get it sent this afternoon, he said. Evelyn put her hand on the bar. Mr. Morrison. Tom looked at her. Why are you helping? She asked. It was the same question she'd asked Caleb in the same genuine tone, not suspicious, just someone trying to understand the rules of a world that was behaving differently than she'd learned to expect. Tom looked at her for a moment. I had a daughter, he said. She left a bad situation about 9 years back, got out to Oregon eventually, got good. He put the paper down. Somebody along that road was decent to her. I figure that's an account that runs in both directions. Evelyn looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, once the small, controlled nod of a woman who was not going to show how much that had affected her in a stranger's saloon. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, Tom said. He looked at Caleb. Ridley's not a man who stops at a wire. He finds what he's looking for. I know what Ridley is, Caleb said. Then you know this isn't over by a long stretch. No, Caleb said. It's not. He stood up from the bar. But it started. They rode back to the ranch in the cold, clear morning. The road still rutted from the storm, Clara picking her way along it, with the steady, sensible care of a horse that had decided she was being ridden by someone worth caring about. Evelyn rode quietly, not talking, but not the tense silence of fear, more the silence of someone running numbers, calculating odds, working through a problem with the particular focused intensity of a person who had always thought more clearly than others expected. About a mile from this ranch, she said, He's going to say I'm unstable. Caleb looked over. That's his strategy, she said. When I left the first time, that's what he told people, that I was having episodes, that he was trying to get me help, and I kept running. She said it without bitterness, with the weary accuracy of someone who had studied an opponent for years. It's clever. It makes everyone who tries to help me look like they've been manipulated by a sick woman. Is there anyone who knows the truth? In Helena. She thought about it. His housekeeper. But she'd never speak against him. She's got 2 sons who work the freight line. Another pause. The doctor who set my ribs. Twice. Her voice didn't change when she said it. But he's on Victor's payroll too. The whole of Helena is on Victor's payroll in one way or another. Miles City isn't Helena. No. And Franklin Greer answers to federal cases, not territorial arrangements. She looked at him. "You're very sure about this, lawyer?" "He's honest," Caleb said. "In this part of the world at this particular moment, that's not nothing." She wrote in silence for a moment. "Caleb," she said, "if this goes wrong, I know. I mean," she stopped, started again. "I don't want you to lose what you've built here because of me." He looked at her steadily as they rode. "You don't get to decide that for me," he said. "That's mine to decide." She opened her mouth, then she closed it. She looked at the road ahead. After a moment, she said very quietly, "That's the first time anyone's said that to me in a long time." "What?" "That something was their choice to make." A pause. "Usually, people either make choices for me, or they leave me to make them completely alone." "Neither of those sounds right," he said. "No," she said. "They don't." They came up the rise toward the ranch, the cabin visible ahead, the chimney cold. They'd banked the fire low this morning. She urged Clara slightly forward to pull ahead of him, and he watched her ride toward the barn, with the ease of someone who had found the rhythm of this place. And he thought about Hank Ridley, sending a telegraph to Helena, and whatever was being wired back, and the short window Tom had mentioned. He thought about the papers in the kitchen, and the lawyer in Miles City, and the 4 months she hadn't told him about until yesterday. He thought about the way she'd looked in the saloon when Tom Morrison told her about his daughter. The way she'd held herself together. He rode into the barn and dismounted and began unsaddling Justice, and she was already doing the same with Clara, talking to the mare in a low voice he couldn't quite make out. And the barn was warm from the horses, and the morning felt, despite everything, like something that was being built rather than dismantled. He didn't know how long they had before Ridley came back. 1 day. Maybe 2. Not enough time. It was never enough time. But it was what they had. Franklin Greer's reply came faster than either of them expected. Tom sent word out to the ranch the following morning, not a rider, which would have been conspicuous, but his supply boy, 12 years old and unreadable as a fence post, who arrived at the cabin door with a folded note and a tin of tobacco he hadn't been asked to bring, and accepted a biscuit in return, and left without a word. Caleb read the note first, then passed it to Evelyn without comment. She read it standing at the kitchen table. Her face didn't change much, but her hand tightened once on the paper. Greer was coming. Not sending a reply coming. He would be in Gardner within 4 days, weather allowing, traveling on a matter he described in the note only as requiring personal attention rather than correspondence. Tom had clearly told him more in the wire than Caleb had specified. That was Tom. He understood what information mattered and moved it efficiently. 4 days, Evelyn said. Ridley's timeline is tighter than that. Yes. She set the note on the table. She was thinking he could tell by the particular quality of stillness she got when she was working through something, the small crease between her brows, the way she stood very straight, like she was bracing against whatever conclusion was coming. "We have to assume he knows I'm here," she said. "By now. Someone in Gardner will have said enough." "Probably. So he's not coming to look. He's coming to collect." She looked at Caleb. "He'll have paperwork. Victor always has paperwork. Something that looks like law even when it isn't." "What kind of paperwork?" "A writ of some kind. Competency. Maybe the unstable wife argument I told you about. Or abandonment of marital home, which in this territory is still technically grounds for a husband to compel return." She said this like she'd memorized a legal text, which Caleb suspected she had. She'd clearly spent time understanding the tools that could be used against her. "He'll find a territorial judge who owes Victor a favor and get something signed. Ridley will carry it like it's a badge. And if the paperwork is fraudulent, it's not fraudulent. That's the problem." She sat down. "It's real paper with real signatures. The fraud is in the process that produced it, not the document itself. And proving that takes time and standing and someone who knows where to look." She paused. "Which is why Greer matters." 4 days, Caleb said again. 4 days. They looked at each other across the table. "Then we go about our business," he said. "We don't disappear. That looks like guilt, and it looks like fear. and it gives Ridley something to point at. We stay visible, we stay calm, and we give Greer time to get here. She studied him. You've thought about this. I thought about it all night. So did I. A pause. I thought about running again, going further west, further north, somewhere the name Brennan doesn't carry weight. And she was quiet for a moment. And I'm tired of running, she said. I have been running since before I left Helena. I was running inside that house for 2 years before I ran out of it. She put her hands flat on the table, a deliberate grounding gesture. I want to stop. Then stop, he said. She looked at him. Here, she said. The word held more weight than its 4 letters. Here, he said. For now. For as long as it takes. She held his gaze for a moment longer than was casual. Then she looked down at the table and nodded once, the compact nod of a woman who had made a decision and intended to keep it. That afternoon, Caleb split wood. Not because they needed it, the pile was adequate, but because he needed to do something physical with his hands while his mind worked, and splitting wood was honest labor that required just enough attention to keep panic at bay and not enough to stop thinking. He heard the cabin door. He heard her boots on the porch steps. He didn't stop. She sat on the porch steps and watched him work, not saying anything. Just there in the cold afternoon, her coat pulled tight, watching him swing the axe with the focused attention she gave most things. After a while, she said, "Tell me about Margaret." He split the piece he was working on, set up another. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me." He swung, split, set up another. She was from Ohio, came out here with her family when she was 16. I met her at a land auction in Billings. She was translating for her father, who'd gone partially deaf and couldn't hear the bids. He paused. She was the most competent person I'd ever met. Organized everything, remembered everything, made decisions before most people finished thinking about whether decisions needed to be made. She sounds formidable. She was. Another split. The fever took all of it eventually, took her down piece by piece over almost a year. That was the hardest part, watching someone that capable become dependent, and watching her know it, and watching her fight it, even when she couldn't win. How did you survive it? The question landed differently than he expected. Not soft, not therapeutic, just direct. How? The mechanical question of a woman who understood survival as a practical matter. He set down the axe. I didn't for a while, not in any meaningful sense. He looked at the wood pile. Then I started working, just working, everything on the ranch that needed doing. I didn't stop long enough to feel much of anything for about 2 years. And then I just kept going, because stopping didn't seem to have a point, and going didn't seem to make things worse. He picked up the axe again. It's not a story with much wisdom in it. It has more wisdom than you think, she said. He looked at her. Surviving by working, she said. Finding the thing your hands know how to do and doing it until the rest of you catches up. She was looking at her own hands. That's what I've been doing since I was 17 years old, just in different circumstances. He didn't ask what the circumstances were. He had learned that she offered what she was ready to offer, and pressed silence in the direction of the rest, and pushing into that silence produced only withdrawal. But she surprised him. My father died when I was 17, she said. My mother was already gone. There was a brother, but he was in the army and not coming back to Montana. She paused. A neighbor offered to take the farm. For very little money he knew I had no position to negotiate from. I took it because I had no choice. Another pause longer. Victor found me about a year later. I was working in Helena in a dress shop. He was charming. She said the word with the precise flat accuracy of someone who had since come to understand what the charm had been for. He was very charming. Caleb said nothing. He was not splitting wood anymore. I was 23 when we married, she said. I thought I had found the solid ground. The thing you're supposed to find. A man who could provide, who was respected, who wanted to take care of me. She stopped. When she spoke again, her voice was level controlled, the control that had been built over years of needing it. I didn't understand that taking care of could mean something entirely different from what I thought. When did you understand? 3 months in. She said it without flinching. He came home in a mood about a freight contract that had fallen through. I said something I don't even remember what something neutral. I wasn't arguing, I wasn't. And he hit me. She paused. I was so shocked I couldn't respond. I just stood there. And he apologized immediately, completely, the way someone does when they know it was wrong and they want you to believe they know it. She looked at Caleb. I believed him. Of course you did. For a while. She pulled the coat tighter. It took me longer than it should have to stop believing him. I tell myself that was inexperience or fear, or the particular way he had of making me doubt my own recollection of events. She paused. But I think part of it was simpler than that. I didn't want to have made a mistake that large. That honesty, the plain, unsparing quality of it, landed in Caleb's chest like something physical. Evelyn, he said. She looked at him. You didn't make a mistake, he said. He did. She was quiet for a moment. I know that now. Another pause. Knowing it and being able to feel it as true are not the same thing. Not yet. No, he said. They're not. He set the axe against the wall and sat on the end of the porch a few feet from her. Not close. Just not at the other end of the yard anymore. They get closer together over time, knowing and feeling. They move toward each other. She looked at him. Is that what happened with you? With Margaret? Yes, he said. Took about 4 years. Then one morning I woke up and I knew she was gone, and I felt that she was gone, and neither one felt like a contradiction anymore. Evelyn looked at the space between them on the porch steps. 4 years, she said quietly. Give or take. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I have one more thing to tell you. Something in her voice had changed, not tighter, but different. The tone of someone coming to the part of the story they had been working toward for a long time. All right, he said. She turned to face him more directly. Her eyes were steady. The reason I ran when I did, she said. It wasn't only the pregnancy. It wasn't only the documents. She paused. 3 weeks before I left, Victor came home from a meeting with Ridley. I was in the hallway and I heard them talking. They didn't know I was there. She paused again. They were talking about a woman in Butte. A woman who had told someone that she'd seen Ridley handling something for Victor. Something related to one of the land parcels. A dispute that had been resolved faster than it should have. Her voice was very even. They were talking about what needed to happen so that woman stopped being a problem. Caleb went very still. She left Butte 6 days later, Evelyn said. I don't know where she went. I don't know if she's all right. She held his gaze. I know what I heard. I know what it meant. And I know that if Victor finds out about the documents, I took the land fraud evidence, I'm not just a runaway wife anymore. The afternoon had gone quiet around them. The kind of quiet that had weight in it. You're a witness, Caleb said. Yes. To more than land fraud. Yes. He sat with that for a moment. He thought about the shape of this thing, how much larger it was than a missing woman and a bounty notice. He thought about Hank Ridley riding south to wait on a telegraph and what that telegraph likely contained. Does Ridley know you were in the hallway? He said. I don't think so, but Victor is thorough. He'll have wondered what I know. She paused. The longer I'm missing, the more he'll assume I know everything. Which means the nature of this changes. It changes what Ridley's authorized to do, Caleb said. Yes. The words sat between them. He looked at her, at this woman on his porch steps in the Montana winter, carrying documents that could bring down a freight magnate and knowledge that made her dangerous to men who resolved their problems permanently. Pregnant. 4 months. Alone on a road in a blizzard 3 weeks ago. He understood now why her pulse had been that close to stopping. She hadn't been simply lost in a storm. She had been running from something that would kill her if it caught her. You should have told me this at the beginning, he said. I know. It changes the risk for you. And for me. I know that too. She didn't look away. I was afraid that if I told you, you'd reassess. Reassess. Decide the situation was too complicated, too dangerous. A pause. Decide that a decent thing done in a snowstorm didn't obligate you to anything more. He looked at her steadily. And now that you've told me... She held his gaze. Now I'm waiting to find out if I was wrong about you. The moment stretched. The cold pressed in around the edges of it. You were wrong about me, he said. She breathed out a slow, controlled breath, the kind that was keeping something larger contained. The documents go somewhere safe tonight, he said. Not in the cabin. If Ridley comes with paperwork, the cabin's the first place they look. He stood up. And tomorrow morning I'm riding to Tom's and we're going to send another wire to Greer. He needs to know the full shape of this. She stood up too. Caleb. He looked at her. She reached out and put her hand on his arm just briefly, just a second, the lightest contact. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. Went back inside. She stood on the porch for a moment longer, her hand at her side, looking out at the land, at the long white reach of it. The sky going dark at the edges, the particular immensity of Montana at dusk that made every human concern feel simultaneously very small and very urgent. Then she went inside too. He'd already started wrapping the documents in oilcloth. Ridley arrived the next afternoon. There was no warning, no dust on the road because the road was still muddy from snow, no sound of hooves because Caleb was in the barn when he heard the creak of the gate. And by the time he was at the barn door, the man was already in the yard. He was big. Not the theatrical big of men who wanted to be feared, the functional big of someone who had spent years doing physical work and had learned to use size as information before anything else. He sat his horse with the stillness of a man accustomed to arriving in places where he wasn't welcome. He looked at Caleb in the barn doorway. Caleb Morgan, he said. His voice was level, not unfriendly. That was Caleb understood immediately the strategy, the deliberate reasonableness of someone who wanted to move this situation along without unnecessary friction. That's right, Caleb said. Name's Ridley. I'm working on behalf of Victor Brennan of Helena. He reached into his coat and produced papers folded official-looking. I have reason to believe a woman named Evelyn Brennan is on this property. I have documentation authorizing her return to Helena. He held out the papers. Caleb didn't move from the doorway. Morgan. Ridley said, the patience thinning almost imperceptibly at the edges. This is a legal matter. I'm going to need you to leave my property, Caleb said. Ridley looked at him, just looked for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating. The documentation. I'm not interested in the documentation, Caleb said. I'm telling you to get off my property. A pause. There's a $200 reward, Ridley said. If she's here and you're cooperating, that's a simple... Not interested in that either. Ridley sat on his horse and considered Caleb Morgan standing in the barn doorway. He was doing the math, the kind of math that men like Ridley did, automatically assessing cooperation, probability, resistance capacity, the downstream cost of different approaches. This isn't going to go the way you're thinking, Ridley said, and his voice had changed slightly, not threatening exactly, but the conversational tone was gone. He was speaking plainly now. Brennan has territorial standing. He has a judge's signature on that paper. You're holding a man's wife on his property. I'm running a cattle ranch, Caleb said. Anything else you think is happening here, you're mistaken. Ridley looked at him for a long moment. His eyes moved to the cabin window, instinctive the searcher in him. She's worth more to him alive, Ridley said. It was a strange thing to say. He said it like a courtesy. Get off my property, Caleb said. Now. Something moved in Ridley's expression. Not anger, more like the quiet acceptance of a man who has noted an obstacle and is already planning around it. He folded the papers back into his coat. He turned his horse toward the gate. At the gate, he stopped. I'll be in Gardner, he said, when you want to have a different conversation. He rode out. Caleb stood in the barn doorway until Ridley was out of sight. Then he went to the cabin. Evelyn was at the back window. She had seen. Her face was ash pale, but her jaw was set. "He came himself," she said. "Yes. That means Victor authorized more than a writ." She turned from the window. "If it was only legal process, he'd have sent a junior man with the paperwork. Ridley is—" She stopped. "Ridley is for situations where the paperwork might not be enough." Caleb crossed the room to the kitchen table and sat. She sat across from him. The table between them was bare, the documents were gone, tucked into the oilcloth under a loose board in the barn floor, wrapped in wax cloth against the cold. "He said you were worth more to Brennan alive," Caleb said. She looked at him sharply. "He said that directly?" "Yes." She processed that. "That's—" She thought about it. "That means Victor has told him the situation, that I have something, that I know something." She put her hands on the table. "He's using Ridley as a message. The message being that he knows what you have and he wants it back, and wants me back with it." She met his eyes. "Without whatever I know getting to anyone who can use it." "Then we move faster," Caleb said. "Tom needs to know Ridley's been to the ranch, and Greer needs to know the situation has escalated. It's 2 more days until Greer arrives." "I know. Ridley is not going to wait 2 days." "No," Caleb said. "He's not. He's—" She stood up. She paced to the window and back, and he let her pace because it was how she thought he'd learned that movement helped her process. "In the saloon," she said, stopping. "Ridley will work the saloon. He'll offer money and talk to everyone in Gardner who'll listen, and he'll build a version of this story where I'm the unstable missing wife and you're the man who's been foolish enough to be manipulated by me." She looked at Caleb. "He's very good at that, at building the version that makes everyone who helps me look like they've been deceived. Tom won't buy it. Tom doesn't need to. He just needs enough people in Gardner to be uncertain to be nervous about taking a side. If the town goes neutral, Ridley can operate without anyone pushing back." She paused. "He'll also look for angles, anything he can use against you. Debt, legal disputes, anything that makes you vulnerable to Brennan's kind of pressure." "I don't have debt," Caleb said. "I don't have disputes. I have a ranch that's been operating clean for 16 years, and the only people who have business with me are men who know my word is good." "That protects you from legal pressure," she said. "It doesn't protect you from the other kind." He looked at her steadily. "I know what I'm in." "I don't think you do," she said, and there was something urgent in her voice now, the urgency of a woman who had lived in Victor Brennan's world and understood its physics in ways that Caleb, for all his groundedness, could not yet see. "He doesn't fight fair, Caleb. He doesn't fight legally if legal is inconvenient. He finds what you care about and he—" She stopped. Something moved in her expression. A realization landing. "He'll go after the ranch," she said. "The land itself." Caleb went very still. "The parcels on the survey," she said rapidly. "The land fraud documents, they cover this area. Your east pasture, the ridge parcels, the creekside holdings. I saw the parcel numbers. I didn't connect it then, but—" She crossed to him quickly, put both hands on the table, leaning in. "Caleb, your land is in the documents I took. Your property line sits directly on one of the contested survey parcels." The room was very quiet. "He's not just coming for me," she said. "He came for me because I ran. But this ranch—" She stopped, started again. "He may already have a claim filed somewhere, or he's about to. If he can establish that your east boundary is on a disputed parcel, he can claim your fence line is on Brennan freight property and use that to tie your ranch up in territorial court for years." Caleb looked at her. "The legal action against you isn't punishment," she said. "It's leverage. Give her back and the claim disappears. Keep her and you lose a chunk of what you've built." She straightened up. "That's Victor. That's exactly Victor." Caleb stood up from the table slowly. He walked to the window. He stood there for a moment, looking out at his land. The east pasture she'd named the fence line he'd built himself. the land his father had homesteaded, and he'd expanded through 16 years of work. His land. He turned back to the room. "He made a mistake," he said. Evelyn looked at him. "What? He made a mistake?" His voice was quiet and absolutely certain. "Because those documents you took, if they show he's been filing fraudulent surveys, then any claim he tries to make on my east parcel is based on the same fraud. He can't use the surveys to file against me without the surveys being examined. And once they're examined," she stared at him. Then she said, "the claim collapses, and so does everything else built on those surveys. Which is why he wants the documents back so badly. He needs them back," she said. "Or destroyed. Without them, the official record just shows boundary disputes, messy, but not criminal. With them..." She stopped. "With them, it's a federal fraud case. Multiple parcels, multiple homesteaders affected. A pattern. A pattern that takes down a freight company," Caleb said. The weight of that sat between them. She looked at him, at this man who had pulled her out of a snowdrift and fed her oatmeal and named a horse without admitting it, and never once asked her to be less than she was, and something moved across her face that she did not try to control. "I didn't know it was your land," she said. Her voice was slightly unsteady. "I didn't know when I came here that the parcel numbers I recognized the area, but I didn't..." "Evelyn, I brought this to your door, directly to your door. Not just me, the whole..." "Evelyn," his voice was firm. "Stop." She stopped. "You didn't bring anything here that wasn't already coming," he said. "Brennan had his eyes on this land before you walked into his hallway and heard that conversation. You brought me the proof of it." He held her gaze. "That's not the same thing as bringing the danger." She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright. "Don't cry," she said to herself more than to him. "I'm not asking you to," he said. She almost laughed. Almost. "Greer needs to be here," she said, getting herself back. "And we need him to come with a federal contact already identified. Someone we can get the documents to the moment he arrives. I'll ride to Tom's tonight. Tonight it'll be dark in him. Justice knows this road in the dark." He was already moving toward his coat. "Ridley's going to be in that saloon building his version of this story. Tom needs to know our version first." He pulled his coat on. "And Tom needs to send another wire to Greer tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight." She watched him. "I'm coming," she said. I know it'll be dark. Clara knows the road too." She was already moving toward the back room for her jacket. "And I am not staying in this cabin alone waiting again." He looked at the door. He looked toward where she'd disappeared. 5 minutes, he called. 3, she called back. He stood by the door and felt something move through him that he didn't have a clean word for. Something between admiration and terror. Between protectiveness and the distinct awareness that this woman did not in fact need protecting so much as she needed someone to stand beside her while she protected herself. She came out in 2.5 minutes. He opened the door. They rode out into the dark Montana evening. 2 horses on a rutted road, the sky above them ridiculous with stars, the way it always was out here, the kind of sky that made everything feel both enormous and strangely intimate. She rode slightly ahead on the narrow stretch, and he let her, watching her handle Clara with the quiet authority of someone who was finally, after a long time, moving toward something instead of away from it. He thought about what was waiting in Gardner Ridley in the saloon, working the room, spending Brennan's money on other people's goodwill. He thought about Franklin Greer on a road somewhere, riding toward them with whatever resources he could bring. He thought about the papers under the barn floor, and what they contained, and what they could do if they reached the right hands before the wrong hands found them. He thought about a woman who had said, "You don't have to love me," and the fact that he had answered that honestly, and the fact that he still meant it more now than when he'd first said it, which was the most alarming and the most certain thing he had felt in 7 years. "Caleb," she said, from slightly ahead. "Yeah. When this is over..." She paused. Not the pause of someone uncertain, the pause of someone choosing their words carefully. "When this is over, I want to tell you something. Tell me now, he said. A silence. Not now, she said. When it's over. When the telling of it isn't. She paused again. I want to say it when it isn't mixed up with everything else. He rode for a moment. All right, he said. She didn't say anything else. The road opened up ahead of them, and they picked up speed slightly, and Gardner appeared in the distance. The few lit windows of it orange in the dark, the saloon brightest among them. Somewhere in there, Hank Ridley was talking, and Caleb Morgan rode toward it with a woman on a horse beside him, and documents buried under his barn floor, and the particular settled quality of a man who has located the ground under his feet and intends to hold it. The saloon door was ahead. He reached it first and held his horse and looked at her. She looked back at him, jaw set, eyes clear. Ready, he said. I've been ready for 2 years, she said. He pushed the door open. The saloon went quiet when they walked in. Not the dramatic quiet of a room that stops and stares, the subtler quiet of a room that adjusts, that recalibrates, that becomes aware of something without making a show of the awareness. Conversations dropped half a register. A card game in the corner paused between hands. The 2 men at the bar turned their glasses without turning their heads. Ridley was at a table near the back wall. He had a drink in front of him, and 2 men Caleb didn't recognize sitting across from him, and he looked up when the door opened with the unhurried attention of a man who had been expecting this and had decided to let it come to him rather than go to it. Tom was behind the bar. His eyes moved from Caleb to Evelyn and back to Caleb, and in that movement, Caleb read a complete sentence that Tom didn't need to say out loud. I know I've been watching him. I'm glad you're here. Caleb steered toward the bar. Evelyn came with him, her shoulder almost touching his, not from fear, from choice, from the deliberate positioning of a woman who had decided she was not going to stand behind anyone tonight. Tom, Caleb said. Caleb. Tom set 2 cups on the bar. Coffee, not whiskey. He knew his regulars. Didn't expect you tonight. Roads were better than I thought. Tom's eyes moved briefly to Ridley's table, back. Been a busy evening. I imagine. Evelyn put her hands on the bar. She was facing forward, not looking at Ridley, but Caleb could feel the particular quality of her attention the way she was tracking the room without appearing to track it. The trained peripheral awareness of someone who had spent years needing to know where a threat was without letting the threat know it was being monitored. He's been talking, Tom said quietly, pouring. Buying rounds. Saying. He paused, choosing the diplomatic version, then apparently deciding against diplomacy. Saying she left a comfortable home in a state of mental disturbance, that you've been taken in by a woman who isn't well and doesn't know what's good for her. Evelyn's hands tightened on the bar, one small movement. Then they relaxed. Who's been listening? Caleb asked. Pete Harmon, the Dwyer brothers. Tom named them without inflection. They're the kind that listen to whoever's buying. And the rest of the room. Tom picked up a glass and polished it. Withholding judgment. For now. I need the wire sent tonight, Caleb said. Greer needs to know about the property angle, all of it. Tom set the glass down. I'll go to the station after close. Before close, Caleb said. I don't want Ridley watching you leave. Tom looked at him for a moment. Then he said, Jimmy. The supply boy materialized from somewhere in the back, 12 years old, apparently nocturnal, always exactly where Tom needed him to be. Tom wrote something on a bar slip, folded it, and handed it to the boy with a coin. Station. Now. Wait for the confirmation and bring it back. Jimmy vanished. Ridley stood up. He did it slowly without drama. The deliberate movement of a man who wanted to make sure everyone in the room had time to notice he was standing before he started moving. He crossed to the bar with his drink in hand and stopped 2 feet from Evelyn, which was close enough to be a statement and far enough to be deniable. Mrs. Brennan, he said. Evelyn turned her head and looked at him. Her face was composed. Whatever she was feeling, and Caleb standing beside her could feel the slight rigidity in her posture, the controlled breathing. None of it reached her expression. My name is Evelyn Harper, she said. Your legal name, Ridley said, patient, almost gentle. The voice of someone managing a delicate situation, is Evelyn Brennan. You're a married woman and your husband is very concerned about your welfare. I'm sure he is, she said. He'd like you to come home. I'm sure he would. Ridley looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Caleb. The assessment in that look was professional, thorough, and took about 2 seconds. Mr. Morgan, I appreciate that you acted in good faith. A woman alone in a storm, any decent man does what you did. But the situation is more complicated than it may have appeared. The situation appears straightforward to me, Caleb said. She's not well, Ridley said, and his voice was carefully kind, the voice of a man delivering difficult information to someone who'd been deceived. Mr. Brennan has medical documentation. She's had episodes before leaving making accusations returning. This isn't the first time. He glanced at Evelyn, then back to Caleb. Whatever she's told you, whatever she's shown you, you need to consider the source. Caleb looked at Ridley steadily. Whatever she's shown me, he said. Ridley's expression shifted just slightly. A recalibration. She took some personal papers when she left. Mr. Brennan would like them returned. There it was. Clean and fast, Caleb thought he'd moved to the documents in less than a minute of conversation. That told him everything he needed to know about what mattered most to Victor Brennan in this situation. I don't know anything about papers, Caleb said. Mr. Morgan, I know about a woman who was half dead in a snowdrift on my property who I brought inside because that's what any person does. He kept his voice level, not aggressive calm, the calm that came from having already decided. Beyond that, I don't know what you're talking about. Ridley looked at him for a long moment. Pete, he said without turning. Pete Harmon got up from his table. He was a big man. Pete rangy, useful with his hands in the way that men who'd done hard labor their whole lives were useful, and he'd apparently decided that Ridley's money and Ridley's confidence in the situation were sufficient reasons to be standing up right now. The Dwyer brothers got up too. The room had gone very quiet. Tom set something on the bar. Not loudly, just set it there. A shotgun, short-barreled, pointed at no one in particular. Just present. Just informational. I don't allow trouble in my establishment, Tom said pleasantly. Ridley looked at the shotgun, looked at Tom. His jaw moved slightly. We're just talking, he said. Glad to hear it, Tom said. Talking's free. Everything else costs considerably more than you've got. Pete Harmon looked at the Dwyer brothers. The Dwyer brothers looked at the shotgun. A silent negotiation occurred at remarkable speed, and all three of them sat back down. Ridley turned back to Caleb. His pleasantness had thinned. Not gone, he was too professional for it to go entirely, but thinned to something that showed the structure beneath it. I have a judge's signature, he said quietly. Territorial Court Helena. Mrs. Brennan's return is legally mandated. Show me, Evelyn said. Ridley looked at her. The document, she said. Show it to me. He produced it from his coat. He held it out. She took it with steady hands and read it. Caleb watched her read, watched her eyes move line by line with the focused attention of someone who had spent time learning exactly this kind of document and what it could and could not do. She lowered the paper. Judge Pearson, she said. Helena Territorial Court. That's correct. Judge Pearson, who has had dinner at our house 11 times in the past 4 years, she said. Who my husband has known personally since 1871. Whose courthouse received a substantial anonymous donation last spring for building repairs. She held the document out to Caleb without taking her eyes off Ridley. This isn't law. This is a favor dressed up in legal language. Ridley said nothing. I would also point out, she continued, and her voice was doing something remarkable. Now it was steady. It was precise. It had the quality of a woman who had been waiting a long time to say something in a room full of witnesses. That a writ of this type requires the subject to be examined by a physician other than the one who filed the supporting affidavit. Dr. Hollis, whose name is on this document, is employed directly by Brennan Freight. His examination is therefore inadmissible as independent testimony." She paused. "You can tell my husband that he'll need to do better than this." The room was very quiet. Even Tom had gone still, which was the most remarkable indicator of all, because Tom Morrison had seen a great deal and was not easily impressed. Ridley looked at her for a long moment with something that was not quite anger and not quite respect, but contained elements of both. "You've done your reading," he said. "I've had time," she said, "and very little else to do for 2 years." Ridley folded the document back into his coat. He picked up his drink. He looked at Caleb. "The papers," he said. "One more time. Quiet final, not a request anymore." "I'll say it once more," Caleb said. "Get off my land and out of this town, and go back to Helena and tell Victor Brennan that whatever he thinks he has a claim to, he's going to need a better argument than a bought judge and a corrupt doctor." Ridley set his drink down on the bar. He looked at Caleb with the expression of a man noting a coordinate. The way a surveyor noted a landmark, no emotion, just location, just the information of where something was, so it could be returned to later. "Good night, Mr. Morgan," he said. He left. The door swung shut behind him. The room breathed. Pete Harmon and the Dwyer brothers were looking at Evelyn with expressions that had undergone considerable revision in the last 10 minutes. The revision wasn't complete. The money Ridley had spent was still in their pockets, but something had shifted in the room's understanding of what this situation actually was, and it was not what Ridley had told them. Tom set the shotgun back below the bar. He looked at Evelyn. "Medical law," he said. "Where'd you learn that?" "I taught myself," she said, "in my husband's library, while he was traveling." She paused. "He traveled often. I had a great deal of time to read." Tom looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating something. Then he said, "You want more coffee?" "Please," she said. Tom poured. Caleb put his hands on the bar and let out a slow breath that he had not been aware of holding. "He's not done," Evelyn said quietly to Caleb. "That was information gathering. He came in here to see what we'd do and what we knew and how the room stood. Now he knows." "What does he know?" "That I understand the legal angles. That you have support in this room. That the documents—" She stopped. "He knows we have them. He doesn't know where they are. But he knows we have them because I used the medical knowledge tonight, and that medical knowledge didn't come from nowhere. It came from time in a library where I also found those surveys." She paused. "He'll wire Victor tonight. Victor will send instructions, and those instructions will be different from the ones that brought Ridley here." "How different?" She looked at her coffee cup. "Considerably." The word landed heavily in the space between them. Caleb pushed off the bar. "I need to talk to Tom." He pulled Tom to the far end of the bar, out of earshot of the room, and talked for 5 minutes low and fast. Tom listened with the focused attention of a man absorbing operational details, not emotional ones. He asked 2 questions. Caleb answered both. Tom nodded. When Caleb came back, Evelyn looked at him. "What did you just arrange?" she said. "Somewhere safer to keep the documents," he said. "Not the barn. Tom has a place back of the station house, false floor. Used to run whiskey through there before the territory got opinions about it." Tom ran whiskey. Tom ran a number of things. He looked at her. "We ride back tonight. Get the documents. Bring them here before morning. And if Ridley has someone watching the road, he might. We ride the creek route. Takes longer, harder to follow in the dark." She was quiet for a moment, thinking through it. "All right," she said. "But Caleb—" She stopped. "What?" She looked at him directly. "If this goes wrong tonight, if Ridley has someone on the creek road and they—" She stopped again, more deliberately this time. "I need you to know that the federal contact I mentioned, the one I was trying to reach before I ended up in that snowdrift." She paused. "Her name is Catherine Marsh. She's in Miles City. She's a clerk in the federal land office, and she has enough federal standing to receive the documents as official evidence." She held his gaze. If something happens to me, that's where they go. Catherine Marsh. Nothing is going to happen to you, he said. Caleb. I heard you, he said. Catherine Marsh, Miles City, Federal Land Office. He looked at her. But you're going to be there to hand them to her yourself. She held his gaze for a moment. Something moved through her expression, the complicated movement of a woman allowing herself against all the evidence of her experience to believe someone who said that. Let's go get the documents, she said. They rode out an hour before midnight. The creek route was exactly as hard as Caleb had said. Narrow, the footing unreliable in the dark, requiring slow, careful movement through stretches where the creek bank had frozen and thawed and frozen again into uncertain ground. Justice handled it with the steady authority of a horse who knew this land. Clara followed closely, trusting Evelyn's hands, which were good and steady on the reins. They were halfway along the creek when Caleb pulled Justice to a stop. Evelyn stopped Clara beside him. What? He held up one hand, listening. She listened too. The creek, the wind, and what remained of the bare branches, the small sounds of two horses breathing. And underneath all of it, hoofbeats. Not close. Parallel to them, up on the ridge road, moving in the same direction they were moving. Ridley, she said very quietly. Or one of his men, Caleb said. Moving faster. He knows where the ranch is. He's going to get there before us. Maybe. Caleb put Justice forward again. Move. They moved faster than was safe, which was what the situation required. Clara was sure-footed, and Evelyn knew how to ride, and they covered the remaining creek distance in a time that Caleb would not have thought possible, with a woman who was 4 months pregnant on an unfamiliar night route, except that the woman was Evelyn, and Evelyn had a quality of rising to meet the exact level of what was required that he was no longer surprised by, only grateful for. They came up to the barn from the back. Quiet horses walked in without lantern light. The ranch was still. No horses at the gate. No visible movement. Caleb dismounted and went to the loose board. He came up with the oilcloth package. He stood in the dark barn with it in his hands for a moment. Someone's been here, Evelyn said from near the barn door. He looked at her. The latch on the cabin door, she said. I left it sitting up when we went out. It's down now. His jaw tightened. They came through the cabin. Looking for the documents. She paused. They didn't find them. Not yet. He tucked the package inside his coat. We don't go back in. We ride straight to Tom's. In the dark, the full road. We have to assume Ridley knows the creek route. We can't go back through it. He moved to Justice. We take the main road fast. If Ridley's on it, we don't stop. She was already on Clara. They came out of the barn at a pace that was not subtle and did not try to be. The main road was empty. For the first mile it was empty. Nothing ahead, nothing behind the dark road, and the stars and two horses pushing harder than casual. Caleb could feel the oilcloth packet against his ribs with every stride of Justice's gallop, and he focused on that feeling, on the reality of it, on the fact that it was still there, and they were still moving. Then, hoofbeats behind them. Not close, but there. Don't look back, he called to Evelyn. I know, she called back. She was not looking back. She was looking forward, leaning into Clara's pace, her hands perfectly steady. The lights of Gardner came up ahead faster than Caleb expected. They'd been moving at full speed, and the town was closer than it felt in the dark. He pulled Justice up as they hit the edge of town, forced a walk, forced normalcy, because two people galloping through a sleeping town at midnight was a story that would be told for years, and would give Ridley material. Evelyn pulled Clara to a walk beside him without being told. The hoofbeats behind them slowed. Whoever it was had made the same calculation. Tom's door opened before they knocked. Tom Morrison was apparently also nocturnal in times of trouble, standing at the door in his working clothes with a lantern. He looked at them, at the speed of them, at the controlled urgency of them, at the package Caleb pulled from inside his coat. He stepped back. Come in. They came in. Tom closed the door. The lantern light was small and close. Caleb put the oilcloth package on Tom's table. Someone went through the cabin, he said. They'll have found nothing, but they'll know we moved them. Tom picked up the package. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Evelyn. These are serious documents. Yes, she said. Federal territory. Yes. He looked at Caleb. When I said I'd help, I was thinking more along the lines of a missing person situation. I know, Caleb said. Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Well, I already committed. He moved toward the back of the room. The station house. Come on. They followed him through to the adjoining building, the old stage station long since converted to storage, smelling of old leather and dry wood. Tom went to the far corner, shifted 2 heavy crates with the ease of a man who'd moved them before, and pulled up a section of floor. The space below was dry small-built, with evident intention. He placed the oilcloth packet inside, replaced the floor, moved the crates back. He stood up and looked at them. Jimmy's wire came back, he said, while you were on the road. He produced the slip from his pocket and handed it to Caleb. Caleb read it. His expression shifted. He handed it to Evelyn. She read it. Greer wasn't coming in 2 days. Greer was arriving tomorrow. He'd pushed his travel, and he was bringing someone with him. A name she didn't recognize at first, and then she read it again, and her breath caught. U.S. Deputy Marshal Thomas Garrett, out of the Miles City office. He brought a marshal, she said. Greer's thorough, Caleb said. He brought a federal marshal. She read the slip again. Greer got the wire, and he understood what it meant, and he already had a contact, and he's bringing him. She looked up. That means within 24 hours we have federal standing in this room. Which means Ridley's territorial writ is worth nothing, Tom said. Which means Victor's entire legal strategy, everything he was using to compel my return, becomes secondary to a federal inquiry. She put the wire slip down on Tom's table. Her hands were not entirely steady. He loses his leverage. He doesn't know that yet, Caleb said. He'll find out when Greer arrives. Which means tonight and tomorrow morning are the most dangerous window, she said. He'll push before he knows about the marshal, before he realizes the situation has changed. What does pushing look like? Tom asked. She thought about it. Ridley will come to the ranch, in the morning, early. Not with the writ this time, with something harder. He'll want to move this before Caleb can get to town or get word out. She paused. He'll want to take me, quietly, quickly, and deal with the paperwork issue later once I'm back in Victor's reach. The room was very still. Then you don't go back to the ranch, Tom said. You stay here. If I stay here, Ridley comes here, she said. That puts you in the middle of this directly. I'm already in the middle of it, Tom said. I sent the wire. I hid the documents. He looked at her with the flat honesty of a man who had made peace with his choices. Miss Harper, I've been in the middle of it since I forgot to post that notice. She looked at him. You stay here, he said. Both of you. I've got rooms above the saloon. He turned toward the stairs. I also have a Winchester that's been well maintained and a very good view of the main road from the upstairs window. He started up the stairs. The Harmon boy has been regretting his choices ever since you cited medical law at him. He came and told me so after Ridley left. He paused on the stairs. Pete Harmon, when he's not being paid to be stupid, is actually a useful man. I'll talk to him in the morning. He went up the stairs. Caleb and Evelyn stood in Tom's back room. She was looking at the crates over the hidden floor at the place where the documents were buried, the evidence that had driven her out of a house and into a blizzard and into a rancher's cabin and through a month of fear and careful rebuilding. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he said. If Greer arrives with the marshal, when Greer arrives. She looked at him. You said that very certainly. Yes. Caleb. She turned to face him fully. The lantern light was low and close, and she looked in it the way she'd looked that first night across the kitchen table, bare of performance, all the exterior things stripped away, just the person inside them. I'm scared, she said, not as an apology, as a statement of fact. I've been doing a reasonable job of not showing it, but I'm frightened. I know, he said. I don't want... She stopped. I have spent so long not being able to want things for myself because wanting things was dangerous. Wanting things gave him material. She paused. But I'm finding that I want things again. And that is terrifying because wanting means having something to lose. He looked at her for a moment. What do you want? He said. A silence. To be on the other side of this, she said. To be past it. To have the morning where Greer is here, and the marshal has the documents, and Ridley has no ground left to stand on. She paused. And after that. She stopped herself. After that, he said. One thing at a time, she said, not deflecting genuine. The practical woman reclaiming the wheel from the frightened one. One thing at a time, he agreed. He held her gaze for a moment longer than was strictly practical. Then he said, Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to need everything you've got. She nodded. She went up the stairs. He stayed below for a while. He sat in Tom's chair in the low lantern light and thought about tomorrow morning, about Ridley coming to an empty ranch and finding no one, about the calculations that would run through a professional man's mind when the situation refused to cooperate, about what options Ridley would be left with and which ones he would choose. He thought about Greer on the road right now, pushing his horse in the dark, a federal marshal riding beside him with whatever authority that office carried. He thought about Evelyn at the top of those stairs, doing the thing she did, managing fear with precision, turning it into preparation, refusing to let it make her smaller. He thought about what she'd almost said. After that, he knew what came after that. He had known it since the morning she handed him coffee before he reached for it, and her hand had been steady. He had known it in the barn when she named a horse without asking permission, and the horse answered to it. He had known it in every silences between them that had held more truth than most people's conversations. He had known it when she said, "You don't have to love me," and he had told her the plain truth without meaning to. The lantern burned low. He let it go out. He sat in the dark for a while. Then he went upstairs, and Gardner settled into its nighttime silence around them, and somewhere on a dark road, Greer and a deputy marshal were riding toward morning, and somewhere Hank Ridley was wiring Helena and receiving instructions, and the clock was running on all of it. But tonight there was nothing more to do. Tonight they were still. Tomorrow would come with everything it brought. It always did. Ridley came at dawn, not to Tom's saloon, to the ranch. Caleb knew this because Pete Harmon, who had spent the night reconsidering his choices with the thoroughness of a man who had looked at a shotgun and done arithmetic, came to the saloon's back door at first light and knocked 3 times in the pattern Tom had apparently established with him sometime in the night while Caleb was sleeping. Tom opened the door. Pete stood there in the cold, hat in hand, looking like a man who had not slept and was not proud of the reasons why. "Ridley rode out toward the Morgan Ranch 20 minutes ago," Pete said. "Had 2 men with him I haven't seen before. Came in on the late road last night, not from Helena, from the east. Brennan must have had men already staged in the territory." Tom looked at him for a moment. "You're sure? I saw them ride out myself, watched from the livery." Pete turned his hat in his hands. "I know I've been on the wrong side of this, Tom. I'm telling you now because it's the right thing and because—" He stopped. "Because I heard what that woman said last night, about the judge and the doctor. And I've known men like Victor Brennan, and they don't have wives. They have property." He said it plainly, without decoration. "I don't want to be part of that." Tom stepped back. "Come in." Pete came in. Caleb was already at the bottom of the stairs. He had heard everything. He looked at Pete Harmon for one long moment, assessing, not forgiving, just assessing, and then he said, "How long before Ridley finds the ranch empty and comes back to town?" 40 minutes, maybe an hour if he searches the outbuildings." "That's our window," Caleb said. He turned to the stairs. "Evelyn?" She was already at the top of them. She had been awake. He could tell from her face that she had been awake for some time, sitting with the particular focused stillness of someone who had spent the nighttime hours not wasting them. "I heard," she said. "Greer." Should be on the road now if he pushed through the night. She came down the stairs. She was dressed and her hair was pinned, and she looked like a woman who had made all her decisions before the sun came up. "What's the plan?" Caleb looked at Tom. Tom looked at Caleb. A conversation passed between them that required no words, because they had known each other for 12 years, and this was not a complicated question. "We don't wait for Ridley to come back to us," Caleb said. "We make the town the ground, out in the open in front of everyone. If Ridley wants to take her, he does it publicly in daylight with witnesses, and then it's not a quiet retrieval, it's an incident." He looked at Evelyn. "Can you stand in a room full of people and say what you told me?" "Everything. Out loud." She held his gaze. "Yes." "Without Caleb." Her voice was quiet and absolute. "I have been holding this for 2 years. Saying it out loud in a room full of people is not the hard part." A pause. The hard part was the 2 years. He nodded once. Tom was already moving. "I'll open the saloon early. That'll bring people in. Anything that breaks. Routine brings people in, Gardner. Especially after last night." He looked at Pete. "Get the Dwyer brothers. And anyone else who was in here last night who you think came to their senses overnight." Pete nodded. He put his hat back on and went. Tom looked at Caleb. "You're betting that Ridley won't make a scene with an audience." "I'm betting that Ridley is a professional," Caleb said. "Professionals don't make unnecessary scenes. They look for cleaner angles. And if this becomes a scene, it becomes the kind of scene that gets reported, that gets wired to Helena, that creates exactly the kind of attention that Victor Brennan cannot afford right now." "Because of the documents," Tom said. "Because of the documents." Evelyn had moved to the window. She was looking at the main road, at the empty morning street, at the ordinary stillness of a town, not yet fully awake. "There's one more thing," she said. She said it without turning from the window. "If Greer doesn't arrive before Ridley comes back, if the marshal isn't here yet, we need to be prepared for Ridley to try something that doesn't care about witnesses." "What does that look like?" Tom said. She turned from the window. She looked at them both with the clear, unsparing gaze of a woman who had studied this man for 2 years and knew his toolkit. "He'll threaten the ranch," she said. "Not Caleb directly, the land. He'll say Victor has already filed the contested boundary claim in territorial court, and that Caleb has 48 hours to vacate the east pasture before sheriffs come to enforce it." She paused. "It's probably not true yet. But it might be by now. Victor could have had it filed while Ridley was in transit." She looked at Caleb. "And if it's filed even fraudulently, it ties your land up in court for months. He knows you can't run cattle on contested land without the bank getting nervous." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "He's willing to destroy my ranch," he said, not as a question. "He's willing to destroy anything that keeps me here," she said. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. It's not about the land. It's about removing every reason for you to keep fighting." Her voice was steady. "He did it to me the same way. Removed every option, every support, every person I thought I could lean on, until I had nothing left but him." The room was still. "He's not going to do that here," Caleb said. "How do you know?" "Because here is different." "Why?" He looked at her directly. "Because you're not alone this time." She held his gaze for a moment. Something in her face moved, not breaking, not collapsing, but shifting the way ice shifted in late winter when the temperature changed beneath it. "All right," she said. "Then let's go." The saloon filled faster than Caleb expected. Tom's instinct was right. The open door at an unusual hour pulled people in the way unusual things always did in small towns. Some came for coffee. Some came because they'd heard about the night before and wanted to see what came next. Some came because Pete Harmon, or one of the Dwyer brothers, had said something on the way in that had piqued their sense of what was right. By the time the first hour was done, there were 14 people in Tom Morrison's saloon, which was most of the adults in Gardner, who were not actively ranching or running a business at that moment. The hardware man, the woman from the dry goods, Sarah, who had told Ridley's man what she knew, and had been bothered by it ever since. The blacksmith, 2 ranch hands who rented a room above the feed store, a retired circuit judge named Abernathy, who had come through Gardner 3 years ago and apparently never left, which happened sometimes with old men and Montana. Caleb had not planned for a retired judge. He looked at Tom when he noticed the old man. Tom gave a very small shrug that meant I didn't plan it either, but here we are. Evelyn was standing at the bar. She had been talking, not performing, not making a speech, just talking the way she talked when she was being honest, which was directly and without excessive ornamentation. She was telling Sarah about the medical documentation. She was telling the blacksmith about the survey parcels. She was telling the ranch hands about what she'd heard in the hallway in Helena about the woman in Butte. People were listening, not with the polite half-attention of people tolerating a story, with the focused stillness of people hearing something true. Ridley came back at 8:30. Caleb heard the horses first, 3 of them, which confirmed Pete's count, and he crossed to the window and watched Ridley dismount with his 2 men on the street outside. Ridley looked at the saloon, looked at the horses tied at the rail, the number of them indicating occupancy at an unusual hour. His jaw moved slightly. He stood for a moment on the street making calculations. Then he came in. His 2 men stayed at the door. Ridley came to the bar. The room had gone quiet in the particular way it had gone quiet the night before, but this time the quality of the quiet was different. The night before, it had been the quiet of people not wanting to get involved. This morning, it was the quiet of people who had already decided. Ridley looked around the room. He was doing the count 14 people the makeup of them what it meant that the dry goods woman and a retired judge and the blacksmith were all standing in a saloon at 8:30 on a weekday morning. He looked at Evelyn. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, quieter than the night before. He had read the room. "Still Harper," she said. He set the papers on the bar. Not the writ from last night new papers. Caleb looked at them and felt the particular cold that came from seeing something you'd anticipated and hoped wouldn't be real. "Territorial claim," Ridley said. "Filed yesterday morning in Helena. Contested boundary on the Morgan East pasture. 240 acres under review pending survey verification." He looked at Caleb. "Your bank will be notified today. Standard procedure." The room absorbed that. Caleb picked up the papers. He read them. They were real enough, filed fast enough that Victor Brennan had clearly had them prepared before Ridley even left Helena. This had been the plan from the beginning. The writ was the opening move. The land claim was the one that was supposed to end it. "Caleb." Evelyn's voice low beside him. He set the papers down. He looked at Ridley. "I want to show you something," he said. Ridley waited. Caleb looked at Tom. Tom moved to the back. He was gone for 2 minutes. When he came back, he set the oilcloth packet on the bar. Ridley's eyes went to it immediately. Immediately and completely the focused attention of a man who had been looking for that object for some time. "Federal Land Survey records," Caleb said. "Original correspondence between Victor Brennan's land agent and a territorial surveyor in Billings, detailing the systematic falsification of boundary records on 17 parcels in this territory." He paused. "Including the parcel that your contested claim is based on." He put his hand on the packet. "The same fraudulent survey that Brennan used to build his claim against my east pasture is in here, which means the claim he filed yesterday is based on fabricated evidence." He looked at Ridley steadily. "Which means it's not a land dispute. It's fraud. Federal territory. Federal jurisdiction." Ridley said nothing. "There's more," Evelyn said. She stepped forward. She was standing beside Caleb now, not behind him at the bar, with her hands flat on the surface facing the room, rather than facing Ridley. Because she was. Caleb understood talking to everyone in it, not just the man with the papers. "My name is Evelyn Harper," she said. "I was married to Victor Brennan of Helena for 3 years. During those 3 years, he broke my ribs twice, my wrist once, and systematically worked to eliminate every person in my life who might have helped me leave." She said this clearly, without her voice wavering, the plain delivery of a woman who had rehearsed this moment in her own mind so many times that the emotion of it had been processed somewhere separate from the telling. I left because I was pregnant, and because I had come to understand that staying meant I would not survive long enough for it to matter. She paused. I also left with documents that prove Victor Brennan has been committing federal land fraud across this territory for at least 4 years. I left with them deliberately, because I knew that if I was ever found, those documents were the only thing that might protect me. The saloon was absolutely still. "I'm not unstable," she said. "I'm not having an episode. I am a woman who left a violent man, and I am asking the people in this room to understand the difference." Old Abernathy, the retired judge, was looking at the oilcloth packet on the bar. He had the expression of a man running legal calculations at considerable speed for someone of his age. Ridley put both hands on the bar. He leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, but with the weight of a man using his size as language. "Miss Harper." He chose the name deliberately, a concession. "Whatever your personal circumstances, the legal process..." "The legal process was purchased," she said. "I can name the price." Ridley went still. "Judge Pearson received 2 payments from Brennan Freight in the 6 months before signing your writ," she said. "I have the ledger entries. They're in that packet." She paused. "I read everything in that house. For 2 years, I read everything because information was the only form of safety I had access to." The dry goods woman Sarah made a sound that was not quite a word. Ridley straightened up. He looked at the 2 men at the door. Something passed between them. Not words, just the communication of men who had worked together long enough to speak in expressions. The 2 men stepped back from the door, not leaving, just repositioning. Caleb moved slightly to his left, putting himself between Evelyn and the angle of the door. A small movement. Tom had already moved somewhere behind the bar. Pete Harmon had gotten to his feet from the corner table. The room breathed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Ridley said. His voice was flat now, the professionalism fully showing, no performance left on the surface. "The documents don't matter if they can't be authenticated. Authenticated requires federal process. Federal process takes months. In the meantime, the land claim stands, the writ stands, and you..." He looked at Evelyn. "You are a married woman without legal standing to bring any action on your own behalf under current territorial statute." He said it without pleasure, just fact. And it was a fact. Caleb knew it was a fact. He saw it land on Evelyn too, the slight tightening around her eyes, the recognition of the wall she'd always known was there. The law as it currently existed was not designed to help her. It was designed around men like Victor Brennan, who understood how to use it, who had built their position inside it. The door opened. Not the men at the door behind them. The door opening from outside. Cold morning air coming in. 2 men entered. One of them was in his 50s, compact, with the look of a man who spent most of his time on the road and had made peace with that. He wore a jacket Caleb recognized as the kind that lawyers wore when they were traveling rather than arguing. The other man was younger. He wore a badge. Franklin Greer looked around the room with the quick, comprehensive attention of a man who had walked into complicated situations before and knew how to read them fast. His eyes found Caleb, found Evelyn, found the oilcloth packet on the bar. He crossed the room in 10 steps. The man with the badge stayed at the door. "Caleb," Greer said. He put his hand out. Caleb shook it. "Franklin?" Greer looked at Evelyn. "Miss Harper, Franklin Greer." He looked at the packet. "Are these the survey documents?" "Yes," she said. He picked them up. He opened the oilcloth with the careful efficiency of a man who had been waiting for exactly this. He looked at the first page for 15 seconds, then the second. He looked at Ridley. "Thomas Garrett," he called to the man at the door. The deputy marshal crossed the room. Greer handed him the packet. "Federal land fraud documentation. I need you to take possession officially." Garrett looked at the papers. He looked at Greer. He looked at Ridley. "You, Ridley," he said. Ridley said nothing. "Working for Victor Brennan of Helena." "I work for Brennan Freight." "Yes. Then I need you to understand something." Garrett's voice had no performance in it whatsoever. No threat, no drama. Just the flat, authoritative tone of a federal officer stating fact. These documents, once in my possession, are federal evidence. Any attempt to recover, destroy, or suppress them constitutes obstruction of a federal investigation. The contested land claim filed yesterday in Helena is based on survey records that appear in this evidence as falsified. I'm suspending that claim pending federal review." He paused. "And I need the names of the 2 men at the door and yours for my report." The 2 men at the door had gone very still. Ridley looked at Garrett for a long moment. Caleb watched Ridley's face, watched the professional inside him, doing the final accounting, adding up what he had and what he'd lost, and what happened next. Ridley was not a stupid man. That was the thing Evelyn had said. He was intelligent and patient, and did exactly what he was paid to do. And the mathematics of this situation had just fundamentally changed. "My name is Hank Ridley," he said. "I'm an employee of Brennan Freight, working under a legitimate writ from a territorial court." "I understand that," Garrett said. "The writ's legitimacy is now under federal review along with everything else. You're free to go. But I'll need you to remain available. You'll be contacted for a deposition." A silence. "And the writ?" Ridley said. "Suspended," Garrett said. "As of right now." Another silence. And then Hank Ridley did the thing that professionals did. When the situation had genuinely turned, he accepted it. He did not make a scene. He did not argue, or threaten, or reach for something dramatic. He picked up the papers from the bar, the papers that had just become worth nothing, and he folded them into his coat. He looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him. "He's going to fight this," Ridley said. It wasn't a threat. It was information delivered without investment the way he delivered everything. "You understand that. A federal inquiry takes time. He has resources." "I know," she said. "He's not going to simply accept. I know who he is," she said. "I was married to him." She held Ridley's gaze with the steady clarity of a woman who had arrived at something. "Let him fight. Let him spend every resource he has. Let him explain to a federal court where his survey money went and what happened to the woman in Butte." She paused. "He can fight all he wants. He's going to lose." Ridley looked at her for one more moment. Then he turned and walked to the door. His 2 men went with him. The door closed behind all 3 of them. The saloon let out a collective breath. Sarah from the dry goods put her hand over her mouth. One of the ranch hands sat down heavily in his chair. Pete Harmon rubbed the back of his neck and looked at the ceiling. Garrett was already talking to Greer in a low, fast voice, the procedural conversation of 2 men with a great deal of work suddenly in front of them, the kind of conversation that would go on for hours, and then days, and then months. Evelyn stood at the bar. She was not shaking. That was the first thing Caleb noticed. She was not shaking. She was not crying. She was not performing relief for the room. She was standing very still with her hands on the bar, looking at the space where Ridley had been standing. He moved to stand beside her. She didn't look at him immediately. She was processing, he could see it, the internal work of a person who had been running at full capacity for a very long time, and was just beginning to feel the ground stop moving. "He's gone," Caleb said. "For now," she said. "For now," he agreed. "And now Greer and Garrett have the documents. And the federal process is started. And your testimony is on record in a room with 14 witnesses, including a retired judge." He paused. "It's not over. But the shape of it has changed." She turned and looked at him. "The shape of it has changed," she said, testing the words. "Yes. That's not the same as safe." "No," he said, "but it's closer than you were." She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were very clear. "You said we'd face whatever came together," she said. He had not said exactly that he had thought it had intended, it had organized everything he'd done in the past days around it. But she had understood it anyway, which said something about the quality of attention they had developed for each other in this unlikely month. "Yes," he said. "I'd like to hold you to that," she said. "I was counting on it," he said. Old Abernathy materialized beside them, with the unnerving quiet of old men who had stopped making noise when they moved. He looked at Evelyn with eyes that were sharp and tired in equal measure. "Young woman," He said, "I was a territorial judge for 19 years. I've seen that kind of documentation exactly once before." He nodded toward where the oilcloth packet had been. The man it belonged to spent 4 years in a federal facility and lost every freight contract he'd ever held. He paused. "I'm not saying it'll go the same way. I'm saying I've seen it go that way." He looked at Caleb. "Your east pasture's going to be fine." He walked away. Greer crossed to them. He looked tired in the way that men look tired when they'd ridden through a night to get somewhere functional, but running on the reserves. "Miss Harper," he said, "I need a formal statement from you as soon as possible. Today, if you're willing." "I'm willing," she said. "We'll need to discuss protection arrangements. Brennan is going to be notified of the federal inquiry within 48 hours. His response is unpredictable." "I know what his response will be," she said. "He'll lawyer up, he'll attempt to discredit the documentation, and he'll put pressure on everyone connected to the survey fraud to recant." She paused. "He'll also privately be calculating whether he can settle the criminal exposure quietly. He's a businessman. He'll look for the exit." Greer looked at her. "You've thought about this." "For 2 years," she said. "I've had very little else to do." He almost smiled. "I want to go through those documents with you in detail. You know the context around them that I don't." He looked at Caleb. "Is there somewhere we can work?" "The ranch," Caleb said. "Tom can spare Jimmy to ride ahead and get the fire going." Greer nodded. He went back to Garrett. Tom appeared at Caleb's elbow with 2 cups of coffee. He handed them over without comment, the gesture of a man who understood that the moment after a crisis was its own kind of thing, requiring warmth and silence more than words. Caleb took both cups. He handed one to Evelyn. She took it. She looked at the cup for a moment. "Clara needs feeding," she said. He looked at her. "I left her in your barn last night. She'll be wondering." She looked up at him with an expression that was almost but not quite the small smile he'd seen in the barn 3 weeks ago when she named the horse. Almost. "She worries when the routine changes." "Clara doesn't worry," he said. "She does. She's sensitive." She held his gaze. "I know her." He looked at her, at this woman who had come out of a blizzard and named a horse, and taught herself law, and carried federal evidence across a territory in winter, and stood in front of a room full of strangers and told the truth without flinching. And he felt something settle in his chest that had not been settled in 7 years. Not the violent settling of a decision made. The quiet settling of a thing that had already happened while he was paying attention to something else. "I know," he said. "You know her." She looked at the coffee cup again. A breath. "I said I'd tell you something," she said, when it was over. "It's not entirely over," he said. "No, but that part of it is." She looked up. Her eyes were steady. "I want to stay," she said. "Not because I have nowhere else to go. Not because the road is difficult, or the weather is bad, or Ridley is somewhere behind us." She paused. "Because I want to. Because this—" She looked at the cup at her hands at the space between them. "Because I came back to life in your kitchen, Caleb. And I don't mean from the cold." Another pause, smaller. "I mean the other kind." He held her gaze. "Evelyn," he said. "I know it's Marie." "Evelyn, quieter." She stopped. "I told you it was too late," he said. "The first morning. I meant it then, and I mean it now, and I suspect I'll still mean it when this federal process has run its course, and Brennan has done whatever he's going to do, and the East pasture is resolved, and all the difficult things have been worked through." He paused. "I'm not good at saying things like this." "You're doing fine," she said. "I'm going to need you to be patient with me," he said. "I've been standing still for a long time. I'm not. I move slow when it comes to Caleb," she said. "Yeah. You rode out in a blizzard at midnight for a stranger." He was quiet. "You're not slow," she said. "You just move in straight lines. You see something that needs doing and you do it." She looked at him. "I can work with that." The saloon was filling back up around them. Ordinary morning noise reasserting itself, people going back to their business, the extraordinary thing that had happened, being absorbed into the ordinary fabric of the town, the way extraordinary things always eventually were. Greer and Garrett were at a corner table with papers. Pete Harmon was nursing a coffee and looking reformed. Tom was behind the bar where Tom always was. "We should get back," Caleb said. "Clara needs feeding. Greer needs the ranch." "Yes," she said. They finished their coffee. They rode back to the ranch in the morning light. Real morning light. This time, the long, clear winter light of a December day after the storms have passed, the kind of light that showed everything as it actually was, without the softening of cloud or the drama of weather. The land was what it was. The cabin was what it was. The east pasture where the fraudulent boundary claim had been filed and would be dismantled was what it had always been: good land, solid land. His father's, and then his. And now the subject of a federal process that was going to, in time, confirm exactly whose it was. Clara heard them coming. She made a sound in the barn that was Caleb privately thought in fact a sound of recognition rather than complaint. Evelyn went directly to the barn. He watched her go in, heard her voice low and clear, talking to the mare. He stood in the yard for a moment in the cold morning light and looked at his land, at the pastures and the fence lines and the cabin with its cold chimney that would be warm again soon. And he thought about what the month had done. What a blizzard and a half-frozen woman and a packet of documents and a retired judge and a federal marshal and 14 people in a saloon had done to the shape of his life. He thought about standing still for 7 years. He was not standing still anymore. He went inside and built the fire. She came in 20 minutes later. Clara settled her hands cold from the barn, and she went directly to the fire and held her hands toward the warmth with the particular economy of a woman who no longer had to ask permission to be warm. He handed her coffee. She took it. They stood by the fire in the cabin that was hers, as much as his now, in all the ways that mattered, and some that would in time be made official through whatever process remained, and the morning moved around them the way mornings did, ordinary, unremarkable, the most ordinary thing in the world. Greer and Garrett arrived an hour later. The work began. It took 4 months. The federal inquiry, the depositions, the authentication of the documents, the unraveling of 17 fraudulent parcel claims across the territory. Victor Brennan hired 4 lawyers, and they were not enough. Judge Pearson resigned his position in February. The surveyor in Billings cooperated with federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges. Hank Ridley gave a deposition in March that was by all accounts meticulously accurate, a professional to the last, having apparently calculated that accuracy served him better than loyalty at this particular juncture. Victor Brennan was indicted in April on 11 counts of federal land fraud and 2 counts of obstruction. The criminal charges relating to the woman in Butte were investigated separately, and that investigation was still ongoing. He never came to Gardner himself. He sent lawyers and letters, and once another man who was not Ridley, who turned out to know considerably less than Ridley, and accomplished considerably less, and who left after 2 days having understood that this particular situation was not going to move. The east pasture was confirmed as Morganland in March. Caleb expanded the fence line to where it had always correctly been. He ran cattle on it that spring for the first time in 2 years, having pulled back from the disputed edge out of practical caution. Clara foaled in the spring a small bay filly that Evelyn named Margaret without asking, and Caleb said nothing about it for a long time, and then one evening said, "That's a good name," and Evelyn said, "I know," and neither of them said anything else about it. The baby came in June in the same back room where Evelyn had first woken up to find a stranger in a chair watching her breathe. The midwife from Gardner attended. Caleb was in the front room. He sat in his chair and he waited, and the fire was going, and outside the Montana summer was doing what Montana summers did, brief and enormous and golden. And when the sound came from the back room, he sat very still and waited another moment, and then the midwife opened the door. "A girl," she said. "Healthy." He went in. Evelyn was sitting up against the headboard, looking exhausted and completely present in the way that people were present after surviving something enormous. She was holding the baby. She looked up at him. "Come here," she said. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. She turned the baby slightly so he could see. The baby was small and very new and had dark hair and was doing what new babies did, being entirely consuming and entirely unimpressed by everything. "Hello," he said to the baby. The word came out rougher than he intended. Evelyn watched his face. "She needs a name," Evelyn said. He looked at her. "You're better at naming things than I am." "I am," she agreed. A pause. "I was thinking Ruth." She watched him. If you don't—" "Ruth," he said. "It was my grandmother's name. She was—" Evelyn paused. "She was the toughest woman I ever knew, and the kindest. Both at once." She looked at the baby. "I'd like her to have that." "Ruth," Caleb said again. The baby made a sound that was not agreement or disagreement, just the simple announcement of existence. He put his hand out careful, the way he was careful with things that were small and new, and the baby's hand, impossibly small, closed around his finger. He sat there with that for a moment. "Evelyn," he said. "Yeah." "I have something to say." She looked at him, waiting. "I've been thinking about how to say it for about 4 months," he said. "I haven't gotten better at the saying of it, so I'm just going to say it plainly." "All right, I want you to stay," he said. "Not because you need somewhere to stay, not because the situation requires it or the logistics favor it, because—" He stopped, tried again. "Because this cabin has been a place where I survived for 7 years. Since you came into it, it's been a place where I live." He looked at her. "I want to keep living in it, with you, and with Ruth, and with Clara, who is apparently sensitive." He paused. "That's what I'm saying." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the baby, at the room, at the man on the edge of her bed who had ridden into a blizzard for a stranger and never once made her feel like she owed him anything for it. "You know I'm going to have opinions," she said. "I know. About the ranch, about the finances, about things that have needed doing that you've been putting off. I know. I'm going to name things without asking. I know that too." She looked at him with the expression she had, the one that was almost a smile, the one that had been appearing more often and lasting longer, the one that reached her eyes now without hesitation. "Then yes," she said, "I'll stay." Ruth made another sound, more insistent this time, the sound of someone who had decided that two people having a conversation near her was beside the point. Caleb looked at his daughter. His daughter. He sat with that word for a moment. Let it settle into its place. Outside, the summer moved over the land, over the east pasture, and the fence lines, and the barn where Clara stood in the afternoon heat with her bay filly, and the world was large and indifferent, and full of things that were hard, and things that were worth the hardness. And inside the cabin, a man and a woman and a new baby occupied the quiet morning in the ordinary, extraordinary way of people who have come through something together and chosen to stay. Evelyn had walked into his life half-frozen and almost gone. He had pulled her back from the edge, and she had, in the only way that counted, done exactly the same for him. They had both in the end been found by the person they needed in the place they least expected, in the middle of a Montana blizzard in the dark, on a road that neither of them had planned to be on. That was the shape of it. That was all of it. And it was enough. It was, in fact, everything.